Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is George Weber. I'm 32 years old. This happened in September of 2025 in a remote corner of the Chippewa National Forest in northern Minnesota. I've always been drawn to the silence of the wilderness, especially after going through what felt like an endless string of disappointments. Being laid off from my job in Minneapolis, breaking up with my longtime girlfriend, and losing my sense of stability. I told myself that a trip away from civilization would be the perfect chance to reset. I just didn't expect what the forest would do to me. I took my German Shepherd, Bear, along because I believed no one should camp alone without a loyal dog for company. Bear is big, almost 90 pounds, with a strong protective instinct and a strangely soulful stare. He'd been limping slightly from an injury he got bounding after a squirrel on a rocky trail outside the city, but I trusted that if anything went wrong out there, Bear would let me know before I had any clue. That's the beautiful thing about dogs. They sense danger, or shifts in energy, or something beyond our usual perception. In hindsight, I should have paid much closer attention to the signs Bear was giving me. I picked a spot off an old logging road that wound through thick stands of red pines and spruces. Officially, the campsite didn't exist on modern maps, just an abandoned clearing near a rusted fire tower overlooking Pike Bay. Or so I'd read on a musty local hiking forum. The more forgotten the site, the more I wanted it. I thought it would guarantee privacy and ensure I could grieve my job loss in peace. I got the coordinates from an older man at a bait shop in Deer River. When I asked for tips on local hidden gems, he nodded gravely, then scribbled down directions on a scrap of paper. Right before I left, he pressed his hand over mine and said, "Watch the shadows, friend." I laughed politely then, but I've remembered that warning every day since. We left in the early afternoon, driving my battered Subaru down that lonely logging road until my phone signal dropped. When I glanced at the screen, it froze on the same time, 1:24 p.m., and wouldn't refresh. At first, I assumed there was just no service out here, which was exactly what I wanted. Off the grid, away from phone calls, emails, social media, the last flickering residue of city life. Meanwhile, Bear snoozed peacefully in the back seat, his front paw bandaged from the minor injury. The logging road soon deteriorated into a muddy track, and I had to steer around deep potholes. Branches scratched the car like fingernails. Eventually, I found a wide patch of ground that looked flat and stable enough to park on. The quiet was immense when I stepped out of the car. Sometimes, forests hum with birds, insects, the wind in the canopy. But here, for a moment, there was nothing, just the sound of my breath. Then a crow cawed in the distance, and Bear hopped from the car, sniffing curiously and letting out a low rumble in his throat. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, giving him a reassuring pat. He kept staring at the edge of the trees, though, tail stiff, muscles tense. I slung my pack over my shoulder, double-checked the straps were secure, and grabbed my compass. The note said the clearing was about a mile from this old logging road, mostly northeast. Bear limped slightly, but he refused to stay behind. He tugged on his leash as if desperate to get going. I hoped his paw would heal quickly in the forest air. We took maybe 20 minutes to weave through dense undergrowth, following what barely qualified as a trail. A faint indentation in the ground, lined by gnarled roots. My GPS refused to load. The screen kept glitching, trying to recenter itself, but every time it ended up on the same coordinates. The path wound around birches and pines, leading us over small ridges. Then, there it was. a clearing of sorts with an old stone fire pit ringed by towering pines. An ancient, half-collapsed wooden tower stood a little way off. It might once have been a hunting stand or a leftover from the logging operation. The place felt unbelievably isolated. Despite the unsettling stillness, I was glad to have found it. I set down my gear and tested my phone again. Still no signal, no surprise. The digital compass on my phone wavered, spinning. Luckily, I had a magnetic compass, though even that seemed a bit jumpy. Bear kept circling around the perimeter, sniffing at random spots, occasionally letting out low whines. He seemed on edge. "Maybe you smell deer or coyotes," I joked. But the truth was that he had never seemed so anxious. I wondered if it was just the new environment. Setting up the tent took a while because the ground was soft and uneven. The soil in some places smelled damp and musty, laced with a sickly sweet undertone I couldn't place. Might have been decaying pine needles or some kind of fungus. I managed to pitch the tent near a thick stump that I used as a makeshift seat. As night fell, the temperature dropped quicker than I expected. In mid-September, Minnesota nights can be chilly, but this felt colder than normal. I tried to start a campfire using tinder and wood I'd collected around the site. The flame refused to catch for a good 10 minutes, and my lighter sputtered repeatedly. Finally, the kindling ignited, and I began adding branches, building a modest blaze. But after a few minutes of normal red and orange flames, the fire died down to a strange greenish flicker. The color was so odd that I assumed I'd accidentally grabbed fungus-covered wood, or maybe something treated with chemicals. Bear stared at the fire as if he hated it. Usually he loves to snuggle near the warmth. Instead, he lay behind me, whining under his breath, as though the flames made him uneasy. He practically pressed his muzzle into my back. I tried to comfort him, giving him a bit of leftover jerky from my bag. He accepted it, but remained restless. Eventually, I crawled into my sleeping bag. The day's drive and the forest trek left me exhausted. Bear curled up next to me in the tent. I drifted off, lulled by the crackling flames and the distant whisper of wind in the pines. The last time I looked at my watch, it read 10:11 p.m. When I snapped awake sometime later, everything was dark. The fire was out. The cold was bone deep in the tent. Bear's spot next to me was empty. I reached around, fumbling for my headlamp. The back of my neck tingled, like I was being watched. "Bear," I whispered, voice quivering. Silence. I unzipped the tent and shone the light around the clearing. My entire campsite was drenched in an eerie glow. The moon was bright overhead, though it cast strange, elongated shadows. The stump near the fire ring looked almost humanoid in the gloom. "Bear," I called, a bit louder. No reply, just the rustle of branches and that faint ring of silence. Panicking, I rushed out in my socks, scanning the darkness. The last embers of the fire glowed red, but there was no sign of my dog. Then, off to one side, I saw that the pine needles on the ground had been disturbed, as though something was dragged. My heart hammered as I followed the short trail of scuffed earth. It led to the edge of the clearing, but ended abruptly. No paw prints, no sign of a struggle, only Bear's collar lying there on the ground. It looked intact, not torn or broken. Terrified, I grabbed it and ran in circles, calling his name. The forest swallowed my voice. Finally, from somewhere deeper in the woods, I heard a bark, but it sounded distorted, like a bark that was half muffled or played through old speakers. Without thinking, I charged off in that direction, ignoring my sense of self-preservation. If there had been a predator or some lurking danger, it could have easily ambushed me. But Bear was all I had. The barking continued, luring me deeper. I realized after a while that I had no idea where I was. My headlamp beam illuminated endless ranks of pine trunks. Low branches scraped my jacket like skeletal hands. I tripped and nearly fell into a shallow ditch. The barking changed pitch, rising and falling, as if Bear was in pain. Then it cut off completely. Horrible silence. I yelled, "Bear, buddy, I'm here!" My voice echoed. I staggered around for probably half an hour, disoriented, lost. Panic clouded my mind. I tried my phone for a flashlight backup, but it was stuck on 1:24 p.m., the same time it had displayed earlier. No signal, no functional time display. Finally, I forced myself to think rationally. I needed to head back to camp, my one point of reference in this wilderness. Only, I had no idea which way was back. The environment around me seemed to shift. My compass needle spun like it was broken. When I picked a direction and walked, it felt like I was going in circles. The pines loomed overhead, blocking the moonlight. The forest floor was spongy, decaying. A fungus-like smell came from large patches of mushrooms with caps that reflected my headlamp like slime. Time felt meaningless. Maybe I wandered for minutes, maybe hours. Then I heard Bear's bark again, faint and to my left. I pivoted sharply and pushed through thick undergrowth. My foot caught on a root, and I pitched forward, landing on my hands and knees. Something squished under my palms. A dead bird or small animal, though I didn't stop to examine it. I was about to stand when I saw a flicker of reflective eyes in the headlamp beam. A shape stepped toward me. Relief flooded me as I realized it was Bear. "Buddy," I gasped, standing and stumbling over to him. He was standing still, facing me, ears upright. But something was off. Usually when Bear sees me, especially if he's been lost, he runs over excitedly, tail wagging. Now he was rigid, tail low. I saw no collar, which made sense, as I'd found it earlier. "Bear," I said softly, approaching with my arms out. He let me put a hand on his head, but he didn't lean into my touch like normal. His fur felt colder than usual, and a faint odor lingered like wet soil and stagnant water. Then he licked my hand, and I nearly cried with relief. "Let's go back, buddy. Come on," I said. He only stared, head tilted. Then he turned and padded away, expecting me to follow, I guessed. I let him lead. Whether he recognized the path or not, it seemed better than me wandering aimlessly. Eventually, we found our way back to the clearing, though the route made little sense. It felt like we circled back on ourselves once or twice. But at last, the moonlit ring of trees with the old stump emerged in front of us. My tent still stood, the extinguished fire pit next to it. I fell to my knees, breathless with relief. "Good job, Bear," I panted. "You scared me, buddy." He sat next to me, silent, head cocked. I attached the collar around his neck again, but he flinched at my touch, as if it bothered him. I decided he was probably stressed. "Let's sleep," I mumbled, exhausted. The forest seemed unnaturally still once more. No insects, no breeze. When we got into the tent, Bear settled at my feet. I was startled to see that the inside of my sleeping bag was caked in mud, as though someone with filthy boots had crawled inside it. It was unzipped from the inside, too, which made no sense because I zipped it up before I dozed off. I told myself maybe I'd forgotten something in my sleepy haze. I brushed off as much dirt as I could, then wormed back into it. Bear fell asleep, or so I thought, though he looked tense, stiff, as though lying at a strange angle. I woke up at first light. My phone was out of battery, or maybe it had simply died from the cold. The battery icon read 0. My watch said 6:14 a.m., but I couldn't be sure it was telling the truth. Either way, it was bright enough to see. Bear was gone again, but this time I heard him outside the tent, panting. I crawled out and found him lying near the fire pit with something in his mouth. I squinted, stepping forward. My stomach flipped. It was the raw remains of a small animal. A rabbit, maybe. I stepped closer and Bear dropped it. The fur was slick with blood, and much of the flesh was missing, gnawed away. Jesus, Bear, oh God, I muttered. He stared up at me, unblinking, muzzle stained red. The image was jarring. Bear had never been a big hunter. The occasional squirrel chase, sure, but this was more primal than usual. I scolded him, though he seemed to barely register it, as if he didn't understand my words. A sense of unease lodged in my gut. I thought, something's very wrong. But I couldn't confront that feeling fully. I told myself, he's just stressed from getting lost. This is how dogs revert to their instincts. Despite my instincts telling me to pack up and leave, part of me was stubborn. I'd come this far, wanting solitude and a challenge. My job was gone. My relationship had crumbled. Didn't I deserve to push myself a bit, reconnect with nature, prove I could handle adversity? So I planned to stay at least another day or two. I rationalized. Maybe the phone glitch was just a signal dead zone. Maybe the time weirdness was me being paranoid. Maybe Bear's odd behavior was an anxious dog's coping mechanism. To distract myself, I decided to gather fresh firewood. The day was bright. I felt more confident in daylight. I set out with a hatchet to chop some dead branches, while Bear patrolled around the clearing. As I worked, I noticed the pines seemed unbelievably thick. Looking up, it was like the canopy formed a living ceiling. Almost no breeze penetrated, and the forest floor felt damp. My boots left impressions that filled quickly with water. Something about the density of the trees was unsettling. My map, a simple paper one showing Chippewa National Forest trails, had no mention of anything like this. In fact, it was missing many of the hills and streams I'd encountered. I spent maybe an hour gathering wood. When I returned, Bear was pacing, whining as soon as he saw me. I tried to boil some water from a nearby stream for drinking. My portable stove flickered out repeatedly. The water never seemed to reach a full boil, always hovering at that borderline simmer. I gave up and forced down some half-warm tea, which tasted sour. Then I took out an apple from my supplies and found it half-rotten, though it was fresh at home. My loaf of bread was molding at the edges, which was impossible overnight. All the slices had green fuzz. My bag of jerky reeked as if it had been left out for a month. I gagged, throwing most of it away. Fear pooled in my stomach. Something in this clearing seemed to be accelerating the decay of my provisions. I tried to build another fire that evening. The flames sputtered, producing weirdly colored smoke. Bear kept a wary distance. I decided I'd start journaling these odd events. I rummaged in my pack for the small notebook I always brought on hikes. It was soaked, pages stuck together, though my pack hadn't gotten wet. Confused, I tried to salvage it, but half the pages tore. The words I'd jotted down about directions were blurred. Every attempt I made at documenting or communicating was sabotaged somehow. Night came faster than usual. I had no accurate sense of time. My watch might have been working, but I couldn't be sure. At one point, I swore the sky shifted from late afternoon to dusk in the span of minutes, as if an hour had blinked out. That second night was worse. The wind started howling softly, a hollow, moaning sound. I tried to sleep, but Bear kept pacing around inside the tent. "Lie down," I hissed. He let out a throaty whine, then suddenly lunged at the tent wall, snapping at something outside. I jumped, grabbed my flashlight, and unzipped the tent door to shine it around. Nothing, just the black silhouettes of pines. But I thought I saw something move beyond the light's edge. A flicker of motion. I pulled Bear back inside, zipping up firmly. "We're fine," I murmured, but I felt it was a lie. Then, without warning, my flashlight died. Total darkness. I fumbled for my spare batteries. Found them. Popped them in. The light flickered once, then died again. What the hell? I breathed. I had tested those batteries before the trip. Now they were apparently drained. Bear whimpered louder. Maybe 10 minutes passed, or an hour. I had no sense of it. Then I started hearing a sound outside, like footsteps going around the tent in slow, deliberate circles. Crunch, crunch, crunch on the pine needles. My heart pounded. Was it an animal, a person, something else? In the pitch black, I clenched Bear's fur for comfort. We both stayed absolutely still. The footsteps continued for what felt like a painful eternity, circling, sometimes pausing. Then I heard faint whispering. It sounded like my own voice. I can't describe the shock of that realization. It was as though I was overhearing myself from 10 feet away. The whispers repeated phrases I'd said earlier, like, "We're fine," and "Bear, buddy." But they were distorted, drawn out in an unnatural hiss. Then the footsteps retreated. Silence. I must have passed out from exhaustion or fear, because the next thing I knew I was blinking against morning light. My watch read 7:03 a.m. I had a splitting headache and my lips felt chapped. Bear was in the tent, but he was lying in a weird pose, almost as though he was unwilling to touch me. I grabbed the half-empty water container from my pack, took a cautious sip. It tasted rancid. Shaking my head, I stumbled out of the tent and froze. My pack was hanging from a low branch, unzipped. The rest of my gear, cookware, water filter, random items, was scattered in the clearing, covered in some congealed red fluid. At first, my mind jumped to blood, but when I carefully sniffed it, it had no metallic scent, more of a foul, cloying, sweet aroma, like rotting fruit. As I approached my pack, I realized the inside was stuffed with something. A chunk of what looked like raw meat, strings of tissue, fatty lumps. If it was an animal, it was in pieces. My stomach heaved. Why was this in my pack? Had an animal dragged it up there? But that didn't make sense. The pack was carefully hung, not torn or scratched. My mind flickered back to those footsteps circling the tent. Something, or someone, did this deliberately. And what I was seeing was obviously an attempt to disturb me, maybe to mark territory. The tension in my chest skyrocketed. That's when I decided, enough. No more rationalizing. I needed to leave. This place was beyond strange. The rotted supplies, the weird footprints, the whispering in my voice, the missing time, the illusions. It was time to get out. I started packing frantically, but I realized many of my items were coated or damaged. The only thing I really needed was enough water to survive the trek back, but I wasn't sure I could trust the water I collected. Bear sat to the side watching me. I stuffed what salvageable items I could in a half-broken spare pack. Bear's normal collar was missing again, I realized. Was I losing my mind? I could have sworn I'd put it back on him after the first night. Finally ready, I tried to orient myself with the compass for the short walk back to the logging road where my car was parked. But the needle just kept spinning, as though something was magnetizing the area. I hiked in what I thought was the correct direction, using the angle of the sun as a rough guide. But after maybe an hour, Bear started barking, and I realized we were back at the clearing. The stump, the fire ring, the battered tower. We'd gone in a circle. My heart pounded. I forced myself to stay calm. I tried a different direction, triple-checking the sun's position, stepping carefully. The forest was dense, the undergrowth making it hard to maintain a straight line. Over and over, I emerged into the same cursed clearing. Somehow, the land seemed to rearrange itself, or I was losing my grip. Time became strange again. My watch said it was 11:15 a.m., then 10:05, then 12:30. At one point, I thought I saw the sun close to the horizon, despite it supposedly being midday. I was sweating, stumbling, cursing. My wounded dog seemed as disoriented as I was. He'd let out sharp barks every so often, then go quiet. On a whim, I decided to mark the trees with bright orange tape as I walked, hoping I could track whether I really was going in circles. Not 10 minutes later, I found the same orange tape on a different set of trees. I'd tied it in a distinct pattern, and it was repeated exactly. My breathing quickened. I had the nauseating feeling of being in a maze that changed every time I tried to exit. By mid-afternoon, or so I guessed, I was close to collapse. My water supply was basically gone. Bear was panting, drooling, his limp more pronounced. With no choice, I slumped onto a fallen log, rummaging for anything edible. The few energy bars I found had turned slimy, like they'd been soaked in acid. My stomach rumbled. I forced myself to swallow a small piece that seemed intact, but it tasted rancid, and I spat it out. My eyes welled with tears. I cursed out loud at the trees, at the forest, at whatever monstrous force had singled me out for torment. Bear whined softly. He still sat near me, though not as close as before. I decided to rest, thinking that maybe I could wait until night and navigate by the stars. The forest, though, never gave me a chance to rest comfortably. A wave of dizziness hit. I felt my eyes drifting closed. Then Bear let out the most blood-curdling growl I'd ever heard from him. I jerked up. 20 feet away, partially hidden by tree shadows, was a shape. It looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same jeans, same messy hair, same build. My mind went blank with fear. It flickered, as though the edges of its body were rippling. Even from a distance, I saw its eyes, empty sockets, a blank, eyeless face. My chest constricted and my heart hammered so hard I thought I'd faint. Bear barked crazily, hackles raised. Then, in my voice, the thing said, "Bear, buddy." The exact phrase I'd used countless times. It was like a recording, flattened, the intonation slightly off. I scrambled back, hatchet in my hand. The figure stepped behind a tree and vanished. Bear lunged forward, barking at the empty space. We both started running. I didn't know where. We just sprinted away, smashing through undergrowth, jumping over logs. Every so often, I glimpsed that figure sliding between the trees at the edge of my vision. It was always just out of focus, or half in shadow, but I knew it was following us. At last, Bear and I emerged, again, into the clearing. I nearly sobbed in frustration. My tent was still there, and I realized with a jolt that the sun was setting rapidly, as though hours had passed in our flight. Darkness was coming again. No, 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 I muttered, pacing, trying to decide my next move. Once it was dark, I'd be even more vulnerable. If I kept wandering aimlessly, I might break a leg or get stuck. So, ironically, I chose to make camp again, where at least I had some meager shelter. I rummaged for anything that could provide a real defense, found only my hatchet, a small knife, a heavy flashlight I'd re-batteried once. I tested the flashlight. It worked for now, shining bright. I built a small fire with the last of my tinder. Once again, it burned with that faint greenish hue, casting sickly light over the clearing. Bear paced the edges, refusing to settle. My stomach was empty, and thirst scorched my throat. That rotting sweet smell lingered on the breeze. I tried to gather my courage. I decided if the figure came for me, I'd fight. Then, out of the darkness, Bear barked frantically. I whipped around, shining the flashlight. I saw something slip behind the trunk of a giant pine. "Who's there?" I shouted, though I doubted it was a normal person. Silence. I realized the footsteps I'd heard the night before were starting up again. A slow circle around the perimeter, just outside the firelight. My flashlight beam caught a glimpse of a shape, my shape, ducking behind a tree. Another circle, another flicker of motion. The tension was unbearable, like being hunted by a reflection. Suddenly, Bear lunged forward, chasing after it. "Bear!" I yelled, frantic. My dog bounded into the darkness. His barking receded, then a yelp of pain, followed by silence. I froze, every muscle screaming to go after him. But a primal part of me was too terrified. A minute passed, 2. Then I heard soft footfalls returning. Bear emerged. But the moment I saw him, fear gripped me. Something in his face was wrong. He stared at me, not panting, not blinking, lips parted in an odd grin. Usually, Bear's ears would perk or flop. Now they hung in an almost unnatural position. He stepped into the firelight, slow, as though testing each limb. No sign of a wound on him, yet he moved with a subtle jerkiness. "Bear?" I said softly, heart racing. He tilted his head, a deliberate motion, too perfect, as if imitating the gesture. I wanted to believe it was truly him, my loyal dog. But the hair on my arm stood on end. I said his name again. He let out a faint woof, but it was lower than normal, lacking Bear's usual tone. I took a step closer. "Buddy, you okay?" He stared, unblinking, then slowly padded over to me. A dreadful wave of relief and horror clashed in my chest. Could it be him, or was it some copy? I touched the fur along his spine. It felt a bit damp, cold. He stuck his muzzle up to lick my face. His tongue was slimy, leaving a foul odor. I had to fight the urge to recoil. I let him remain near me, hoping my fear was just paranoia. Then, with no warning, Bear snapped his jaws at me, stopping just short of biting my arm. I jolted back, brandishing the hatchet. He fixed me with a dead-eyed stare. A moment later, he resumed a friendly posture, tail wagging as if nothing was wrong. My heart hammered like a drum. Was the forest playing tricks, or had this dog been replaced by something else? I retreated to my tent, not that it offered any real safety. The creature that looked like Bear followed me, head cocked in an uncanny imitation of curiosity. "Stay," I whispered, voice trembling. He cocked his head again, stepping closer. I curled into the tent, hatchet clutched to my chest, shining my flashlight outward. He sat right at the tent door, blinking too little, smiling for too long. I prayed for morning. At some point, exhaustion overcame me. I drifted off into uneasy half-sleep. My dreams were drenched in shapes that looked like me and like Bear, moving in unnatural ways, whispering with my voice. I woke startled at dawn and realized the tent was empty. I scrambled out, half expecting to see the clearing in ruins. Instead, I saw the fire pit cold, no sign of footprints or the dog. My real dog, or the imposter, whichever it was, had vanished. I felt like a man deserted. No sign of life. The forest was quiet again. The sky was leaden, the air thick as if it might rain. Part of me wanted to weep. Another part was determined to survive. "I have to get out," I muttered aloud. "I have to." There was no sense in waiting for rescue. No one knew where I was. Not precisely. I loaded up the bare essentials. The hatchet, a knife, a water bottle with a questionable filter, my flashlight, and a few scraps of food if I could call them that. I left the tent behind, hoping to lighten my load. Maybe I'd have better luck if I just picked a direction and walked, no matter how long it took. If the forest was cursed or possessed or something, maybe I could outrun that influence. For hours, I forced myself to keep moving. My legs trembled with fatigue and hunger. I found a small stream, used my filter, forced down the water. It tasted bitter, but gave me some hydration. I carried on, ignoring the fear that the forest would warp around me. Occasionally, I'd spot old logging debris or a broken fence post. More than once, I caught glimpses of movement, a shape paralleling me, but I refused to investigate. My only goal was to leave. At some point, I climbed a low ridge. The view from the top revealed only endless pines. No road, no sign of farmland or civilization. That's when my will nearly broke. I collapsed, tears leaking down my face. A faint memory of my job, the cubicles, the commute, felt like another lifetime. The rawness of my breakup seemed petty compared to this monstrous situation. I rummaged in my pocket for anything to give me hope. That's when my phone, presumably dead, lit up spontaneously. The screen displayed 1:24 p.m. again. Nothing else. I stifled a sob, pressing it in vain, then letting it drop back into my pocket. Something caught my eye in the distance. A glimpse of a shape that might have been man-made. I trudged downhill to investigate. My pulse soared when I discovered a battered wooden structure. It was the same half-collapsed tower near my original campsite. I was back at that cursed clearing. It felt like I'd made no progress. My mind reeled. I screamed, kicked a tree trunk, splitting the skin on my toe inside my boot. Rage and hopelessness consumed me, but the clearing was not empty. In the center stood me, or at least a perfect imitation of me, wearing identical clothes with the same tear in the knee of my pants. It was crouched near the fire pit, holding my battered flashlight, flipping it on and off. My stomach lurched. It slowly turned its head, revealing a face with no eyes, just smooth skin where the sockets should be. Yet somehow, I sensed it was staring at me. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. The figure opened its mouth. The corners of its lips stretched impossibly wide. A sound emerged, my own voice from earlier times. "We're fine, buddy, we're fine." Over and over, mimicking it like a parrot. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. Then a new voice came from behind me, a low growl. I spun around. It was Bear, or the false bear. He was hunched, lips curled, stepping toward me. Trapped between the two illusions, I felt I was about to die. Doppelme turned its blank face toward Bear, and in the same flattened voice commanded, "Get him, Bear!" My dog's name. The dog snarled, leaping forward. I raised my hatchet in desperation. The dog crashed into me, jaws snapping. I fell backward, managing to wedge the hatchet's handle between his teeth and my throat. We wrestled in the dirt, my heart pounding. It was so strong. In that moment, I realized this wasn't my loyal companion. The dog's eyes were milky white, and when it snarled, thick black drool spattered on my face. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed it back enough to swing the hatchet. The blade struck the dog's side. The impact felt wrong, as if I'd hit something soft and hollow. The creature let out a garbled, human-sounding scream. The skin tore, revealing a gap of writhing black worms or tendrils beneath. A foul stench hit me like a punch. I gagged. The dog reeled away, howling, but then turned back to face me. I swung again, connecting with its skull. Bone crunched beneath my blade, but no real bone fragments emerged, only a pulpy mass of black fluid and insect-like things squirming. The dog collapsed, twitching, then lay still. Adrenaline spiked my vision. I stumbled to my feet, drenched in its gore. My breath came in gasps. Doppelme was still there, silent, as though studying my reaction. For a second, dread nearly paralyzed me. Then anger took over. I advanced, hatchet raised. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The figure's face split in that grotesque grin. It said, in a perfect copy of my own tone, "Let go, buddy." Then it lunged, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. My first swing missed as it dodged with inhuman speed. It slashed at me with claw-like fingers, raking across my chest, leaving deep gouges in my jacket and skin. Pain burned through me. I stumbled, fell. I braced for the killing blow. Instead, the figure hovered over me, face contorting, insects crawling out of its empty eye sockets. I retched in revulsion, kicking it in desperation. The next moment, Bear, my real bear, charged from the tree line, teeth bared. Where had he come from, or was this another imposter? He sank his jaws into the figure's leg. The figure shrieked in my voice, staggering. I seized the chance, raising the hatchet and hacking at its torso. It howled, a chorus of overlapping voices echoing around the clearing. I hacked again, severing part of its shoulder. Black fluid gushed out. Bear continued tearing at its leg. The figure flailed, losing shape as though collapsing inward. But it still managed to smash my lower leg with unnatural strength. I heard the bone snap, a searing jolt of agony. I screamed, collapsing. The figure tried to crawl away from Bear's assault, shrieking. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the pain, and crawled after it. I swung a final time, burying the hatchet in its chest. The shriek rose to a piercing pitch that distorted the air. Then the figure went limp, dissolving into a mass of wriggling black lumps. They scattered across the ground, sinking into the soil. Panting, half delirious, I let out a cry of triumph mixed with horror. My leg throbbed fiercely, likely broken. Bear stood a few feet away, eyes wide, muzzle bloodied. But it was real Bear. I could tell by how his eyes met mine, the familiar intelligence. He limped toward me, whimpering. I crawled to him, hugging him around his neck, tears streaming down my face. For a moment, we just existed there in the clearing, battered, soaked in gore, but together. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. My dog whimpered back, licking my face gently. Our reunion was cut short by the relentless pain in my leg. I had to think clearly. I needed medical help. I needed to get out. That cursed doppelganger dog was dead, and the shapeshifter that wore my face was presumably destroyed. But this forest might still be twisted. With my leg broken, walking out on my own was nearly impossible. Bear and I hobbled to a decaying log where I ripped strips of fabric from my extra shirt and tried to splint my leg using branches. The process made me see stars from the pain. As I was securing the makeshift splint, Bear froze, ears perked. I tensed, expecting more horrors. Then I heard a distant sound. An engine? My first thought was a hallucination, but it grew louder. Hope flared in my chest. Bear started barking excitedly. I forced myself up, leaning heavily on him for balance, and we shuffled toward the source of the noise. The undergrowth was thick, every step sending white-hot spikes of agony through my leg. I pushed on, sweat pouring from me. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights through the trees. A green U.S. Forest Service truck was parked on a faint trail. A ranger in uniform stood, scanning the area with a flashlight. "Hey! Over here," I croaked, my throat raw. The ranger startled, then rushed over when he saw me. "Good Lord," he said, eyes wide at my bloodied clothes and disheveled appearance. "What happened to you?" I could barely speak, my voice choked with relief and trauma. "I was attacked," I managed. "Please help." The ranger, whose name tag read Joseph Martin, hurried to support me. He offered me water, which I drank greedily. Bear stayed close, letting out trembling whines. We made it to the ranger's truck. Martin called for medical assistance on his radio. It seemed the logging road wasn't far away. Somehow, ironically, it was close to where I'd first parked my car. But it felt like I'd been trapped in that twisted labyrinth for weeks. As I sank into the passenger seat, woozy with pain, I glimpsed my reflection in the side mirror. My face was pale, eyes bloodshot, mouth trembling. But it was me, real me, not some blank-faced monster. Bear lay his head on my lap, as though refusing to let me out of his sight. The ranger asked me questions, who I was, what I was doing, if I had a phone. My phone was long dead. I mumbled half-coherent answers. He started driving, the truck bouncing along the rough track. The engine's vibration was a strange comfort. I must have blacked out. When I next came to, I was in a small medical facility in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. An older nurse was setting my leg, and a paramedic was trying to find a vein for an IV. Bear lay in a corner, apparently allowed inside as a special exception due to the circumstances. He watched me, ears perked, as though anxious about my condition. The paramedic's voice was soothing, telling me to relax, that I'd be fine. But my mind reeled, replaying horrors. The black fluid, the rotting supplies, the sightings of my own shape in the forest. I spent the next few days in that small facility. My leg was indeed broken, but they expected me to recover with time. Local police came by, wanting to hear my story. I stammered through a version. A wild animal attacked me, I got lost. I left out the shape-shifting monster. They gave me polite, skeptical nods. The forest ranger, Martin, said he found my car easily and towed it back to a main road. He'd never seen any sign of a campsite or clearing with a tower, though. That confounded me. He said he found me within a mile of the place I'd parked, but the clearing I described was nowhere to be found. I was discharged after a few days. Bear was returned to me, mostly healthy except for his injured paw. At times, though, I caught him staring off into the distance, as if searching for something in the corners of the room. I tried to reassure myself we were safe now. We'd escaped. But at night, nightmares beset me. The face without eyes, the footsteps circling my tent, the illusions of time slipping away. Sometimes, in half-awake states, I thought I heard Bear speaking in my voice. I'd jolt awake, heart hammering, only to find him asleep at my bedside. Some nights, I wake up with a jolt, a phantom ache in my splinted leg. I'll swear I hear barking outside my door, barking in a voice too human to be Bear, or I dream that I'm still in the clearing, and the figure shaped like me is standing over me, whispering, "You should have let me stay." Those words echo in my mind even now. A quiet part of me wonders if the creature truly died back there, or if some piece of it lives on in me and Bear, a shadow that followed us out of the pines. I never found a single photograph of the trip. My phone's camera roll was wiped, but a few weeks after returning home, I discovered a single photo on my cloud backup. The image showed me, smiling by a flickering green fire, but I don't remember taking it. I was looking directly into the lens, eyes wide, a grin too large for my face. Bear was nowhere in sight. The timestamp read 1:24 p.m. I don't go camping anymore, and sometimes Bear disappears for a few minutes around the house, maybe just sniffing around a closet. But each time I find him, a stab of terror floods my chest, wondering if it's truly him. I can't shake the feeling that part of the forest never let us go. Or maybe we never fully left it. I wish I could end this story with some sense of closure. Say I burned the clearing down or found proof that the shapeshifter was destroyed. But real horror doesn't give closure. It leaves you haunted. I survived, yes. I still limp on my left leg. Bear gets restless, whining in the corner late at night. I want to believe it's over, but every time I close my eyes, I see that pale figure stepping out from behind a pine tree wearing my face. And I know, in my gut, that the forest doesn't give up its shadows so easily. My name is Jack Renner. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in August 2025 in the heart of Minnesota's Sawtooth Mountains. I'm not sure if sharing this is my road to closure or to more torment, but I can't keep it to myself any longer. I need to set every detail onto paper. My memory has become unreliable in so many ways, but what remains is burned into me like a scar. I was unemployed then, just a few weeks after losing my job at the auto shop in Duluth. My girlfriend, a woman I'd thought I might marry, had walked out of my life 6 months prior, and in the cruel months that followed, I found myself restless, uncertain, and angry. The best solution I could come up with was to escape for a while. A solitude trip into the wilderness with my German Shepherd, Duke, felt like my only shot at perspective, or at least a chance to clear my head from all the noise. I had no illusions I was a wilderness expert, but I'd done enough short backpacking trips near the Superior hiking trail to feel I could handle this. I planned a 10-day loop, mostly off-trail, along an area that a few obscure backpacking forums claimed was wild, beautiful, and virtually untouched. It was rumored to connect to an older section of the Superior hiking trail. I'd printed topographic maps, downloaded a GPS track, and practiced reading them for weeks. The trail was supposed to circle back to the main corridor near Lützen, eventually depositing me back at my truck. But you never truly know what you're getting into out there, especially in August. Hot days, cool nights, unpredictable storms, and more black flies than you can swat away. Duke was the only companion I allowed myself. He was 5 years old, trained well enough, loyal. He'd been my shadow since he was a pup. If there was anything in my life I trusted, it was him. Together, we left Duluth behind, and I vowed to embrace whatever quiet the wilderness would offer. The first couple of days seemed normal enough. The trail was more of a rumor than a real marked path, but I liked that sense of isolation. I had a map, compass, and my GPS unit for backup. We'd walk all day, break for lunch near a creek, and press on until dusk. Duke trotted around investigating everything: chipmunks, tree trunks, the occasional rabbit scampering away. I felt a pocket of peace that I hadn't had in months. Occasionally, I'd talk to Duke or hum to myself. Sometimes, I'd just listen to the wind in the pines and the rhythmic crunch of my boots in the undergrowth. It was the therapy I needed. On the second night, we camped in a small clearing flanked by a cluster of birch trees. I pitched my tent on a soft bed of pine needles, made a modest fire, and sat staring at the flames as the stars brightened overhead. Duke dozed off happily, no sign of trouble. Before going to bed, I used my GPS to confirm our location. It was functioning perfectly. If anything, I was further along than expected, a good thing. But the next morning, I woke to find the tent door partially unzipped from the inside. Just a few inches, but enough to let a chill run through me. I figured maybe I'd been half asleep and unzipped it myself. We all do weird things in our sleep. I tried not to overthink it. Besides, everything was in place, and Duke was calmly snoring until I elbowed him awake. We packed up and moved on. Still, a subtle disquiet settled in the back of my mind. That day, the GPS started glitching. The screen went blank, then the coordinates reappeared but made little sense. At one point, it told me I'd traveled 6 miles south in the span of 20 minutes, which was impossible. My map and compass told a different story. I attributed it to old batteries or a software hiccup. Not a crisis. Lots of folks navigate just fine without technology, so I slid it into my pack and relied on the map. Not long after midday, the terrain grew more treacherous. The undergrowth was thicker, the slopes steeper. Birch and aspen gave way to stands of pine that pressed close. At times, the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing but my own breathing and Duke's panting. It unsettled me enough that I decided to call an early stop. I found a small knoll that rose above a shallow ravine. It offered decent vantage if any curious wildlife came nosing around. As we ate our dinner, dehydrated chili, no feast, but better than nothing, I caught the first whiff of that rotten meat and sulfur smell. It drifted in on the breeze, faint but unmistakable. It turned my stomach enough that I gagged. Duke reacted too. The fur on his neck bristled, and he let out a low growl. A moment later, the smell faded, replaced by the usual pine and moist soil. I scanned the area, expecting a rotting carcass or a bear with a poor diet, but there was nothing. Still, I kept the hatchet close by that night, zipped Duke into the tent with me, and tried to sleep despite the anxious twist in my stomach. I'm not sure what time it was. My watch read 2:17 a.m., but that was the last truly reliable reading I can remember, when Duke started barking. Something had him riled, and I was on my feet in a flash, hatchet in hand, stumbling out of the tent. The air was cold, colder than an August night should be. I heard a single snap of a branch, but I saw nothing in the darkness, just silhouettes of trees and the faint glow of starlight. Duke's growls rumbled deep. I stood there a few more minutes, adrenaline raging, but there was no second sound, no form rushing at us. Eventually, I crept back inside, heart hammering, and coaxed Duke to lie down again. By morning, I half convinced myself it was just an animal passing by. A deer, a lone wolf, something normal. We pressed on the next day, making slow progress. The map no longer lined up with what my eyes saw. Streams existed where no watercourse was drawn. Ridges soared in places I thought should be gentle, rolling hills. By mid-afternoon, I realized I was walking through a tangle of brush that, according to my map, should have been the wide banks of a shallow creek. That creek did not exist. When we arrived at what should have been a maintained portion of an old logging trail, I found a tangle of deadfall. Everything was off by at least a mile or two, maybe more. Had I misread something? Possibly. Had I wandered into a labyrinth of old growth that got incorrectly recorded? Also possible. But my sense of unease soared. The day wore me down, so I jumped at the chance to rest when I spotted a clearing near a bend in a small river. It was late afternoon. Duke practically fell asleep standing. As I started to pitch the tent, I got the feeling of being watched. My skin prickled with that subtle alarm that resonates in your bones. I looked up. That's when I saw him for the first time. Standing on a rocky outcrop by the river was a man, tall and lanky, wearing an old, worn-out backpack. His clothes looked old-fashioned. Battered boots, khaki pants, a once-white t-shirt bleached by sun. I must have stared for a good 10 seconds. He had wide shoulders, but his frame was almost gaunt. He waved casually, like this was the most normal meeting in the world. I managed to wave back. He approached with long strides and a big, inviting smile. His hair was pepper gray, face deeply tanned. But there was something about his eyes. I couldn't see my reflection in them. They swallowed the light. They were the blackest eyes I'd ever seen. My first thought was that he was wearing tinted contacts or had some rare condition. Then again, weird things happen out in nature. People lose normal gear and pick up whatever they can. Maybe I was overthinking it. "Hey there," he called out. Voice low and surprisingly friendly. I forced a polite smile. "Hey, wasn't expecting to see anyone out here." He nodded. "Same here, name's Sarkis. I've been on the trail for a few days, got turned around. Not my finest moment." He shrugged, feigning embarrassment. "I was following a route from an old guidebook and I guess it was out of date." It was an easy explanation, but the tension in my gut didn't ease. Duke sniffed the air, let out a soft whine, then pressed himself against my leg. Usually, Duke is friendly but protective. In this instance, he refused to approach Sarkis at all. I introduced myself. "Jack Renner, this is Duke." I motioned at the dog, who refused to make eye contact. "Good-looking dog," Sarkis said, though he never looked at Duke. His eyes stayed locked on me. Sarkis said he was trying to find the nearest trailhead or a route to a highway. He asked if I could point him in the right direction. My own sense of direction was shot to hell, but I showed him my map anyway. He listened politely as I described where I thought we were, nodded with interest, and pretended to follow my tracing of rivers and ridges with a single finger. But he never actually offered to compare it with his own map or rummage in his pack for anything. It was more like he was humoring me. I expected him to camp with me. I was already bracing for the awkwardness of sharing a campsite with a stranger I didn't trust. But after a few minutes of polite small talk, Sawtooth said, "Well, no sense in me lingering. I'll try for higher ground before nightfall. Thanks, Jack." He raised a hand in farewell. "Best of luck to you and the dog." He walked off. I watched him disappear among the trees, half expecting to hear twigs snap or to see him reappear in some bizarre way, but everything fell silent. The only sound was the wind in the leaves. I told myself he was just a weird old backpacker, that I was letting my nerves get to me. By the time dusk came, I was almost grateful I hadn't had to share my camp. Still, I couldn't forget how Duke had reacted. Dogs sense things we don't. His cowering made me anxious. That night, the fire flickered blue more than once, even though I was burning the same kindling I always used. The smell of rotting flesh drifted in on the breeze again, and amid the hush of the forest, I heard what I thought might be quiet laughter. Sawtooth's voice, maybe, but so faint and distant I convinced myself it was a trick of the wind. I barely slept, but there were no direct incidents. In the morning, I packed up in a hurry, wanting nothing more than to keep moving and put distance between me and the place where that man had appeared. Something in my bones told me I needed to get out of that area fast. I thought I'd do exactly that, march out. Except, by the afternoon the forest had swallowed me. The map was practically worthless. I recognized nothing. At one point I found a gorge that matched no topographic lines on the page. It dropped 50 feet down in jagged steps of rock and roots, a dark gash in the earth that forced me to pick my way along its edge. By late day, I was exhausted. My legs trembled with every step. I found a plateau of sorts that overlooked the gorge, a vantage maybe, but that vantage showed me only unbroken forest in all directions. No sign of man-made structures or even the ridgeline I expected. The air itself seemed heavier. Still, I set up camp, forcing myself to maintain some structure, build a small fire ring, fetch water from a trickling creek, feed Duke, ration my own food. That night is when everything fell apart. I dozed off sometime after midnight, I think. Duke woke me with a guttural growl. Before I could fully register what was happening, a familiar voice drifted into camp. "Jack! Hey, Jack! It's me!" I grabbed my flashlight and scrambled outside. Standing near the embers of my dying fire was Sawtooth again, but this time his presence felt more threatening, more intimate. My heart was in my throat. He lifted a hand in a casual greeting. "Sorry to bother you, I got lost again. Mind if I share your fire?" I hesitated. Did you follow me?" He chuckled. No, I'd never do that, just ended up here." He gestured around at the clearing as though he was just as surprised as me. Duke barked, a sharp, anxious sound. Sawtooth half turned, still ignoring him, those black eyes fixed on me. I took a step back. "I don't think I can help you," I said. I tried to steady my voice, but I was shaking. My fingers gripped the flashlight like a lifeline. He shrugged. "Maybe not." A grin tugged at his lips. "But we'll see." Before I could question him further, he strode away into the trees, vanishing in seconds. No crunch of leaves, no snapping twigs, just gone. I spent the rest of the night awake, hatchet in my lap. Duke sat beside me, head on my knee, trembling. By the next morning, day 5, I believe, my sense of dread was all-consuming. I decided the trip was over. I'd find any route out, any road, any sign of civilization. My plan was to follow the gorge downstream, hoping it would intersect with a river or forest road. I checked my watch, and it read 8:12 a.m., but the sun was much higher than that, maybe more like late morning or noon. Something about the time felt off. We hiked all day. The gorge led to a thick cedar swamp, the ground spongy underfoot. Sometimes it felt like I'd been walking for hours only to realize barely an hour had passed, or so my watch claimed. Other times, I'd look up to see the sun sinking behind the canopy, but my watch insisted it was still early afternoon. My sense of direction withered away, and I felt sure we were traveling in circles, even though I double and triple-checked my compass. It made no sense. We found a high stretch of ground that was relatively dry for camping. By then, I was so exhausted I could barely keep my head up. Duke was similarly spent, though he still flicked his ears at every small sound in the dark. I set up camp quickly, skipped dinner because I had no appetite, and collapsed into the tent. That's when time twisted again. I closed my eyes for what felt like a minute, maybe two. When I opened them, the sun was shining through the tent's thin walls. My watch read 4:16 a.m. Groggy and confused, I left the tent to find the forest in full daylight. The sun was at least an hour above the horizon. This was impossible. I must have slept at least 5 or 6 hours, probably more, but the watch was playing a different story. My canteen, which I'd filled the night before, was bone dry. The water bladder in my pack had maybe half a liter left, which made no sense, because I should have had well over 2 liters. Something was tampering with my gear, or worse, with my mind. Then I found my sleeping bag, half buried in ferns about 20 yards from the tent, unzipped from the inside. That's when I started to panic. Desperate to quell the terror, I forced myself into a routine: fill canteens, gather wood, check Duke for injuries, see if my phone had any signal at all. It didn't. I told myself that once I got moving, once the sun was fully overhead, clarity would return. If I could just keep marching in one direction, I'd eventually hit a road, a lake, or some sign of civilization. But I also knew there was a presence out here with me, Sarkis, and he was enjoying this game. The stench of decay grew stronger around midday, almost making me vomit. I tried to keep Duke moving, but he resisted, whining at something I couldn't see. My map? Worthless. The lines might as well have been doodles from a child's coloring book. The compass needle spun once in a while, only to settle in contradictory ways. Meanwhile, clouds rolled in, obscuring the sun. By the time I thought to check my watch again, it read 12:01 p.m., but the sky was dark as twilight. Lightning flickered. I braced for a storm. The storm never truly arrived. The clouds stayed overhead, but it didn't rain. The forest, though, got darker, as if the sun had set behind a black curtain, leaving me in a perpetual dusk. My sense of time collapsed in on itself. At one point, I recall stumbling over a large root, hearing the crunch of something under my boot. When I looked down, I saw the scattered remains of a small fawn, half decayed, crawling with maggots. The smell was excruciating. In the faint gloom, it looked like it had been mauled by a predator, but what I couldn't figure out was why it was so rotted. It might have taken days or weeks to reach that state. Yet the eyes were still wet, like it had only just died. I gagged and Duke whined, ears pinned flat. Not long after, I spotted a small clearing with a blackened fire pit in the center. Relief surged through me. Someone had camped here before, possibly recently. Maybe they had a route out. That hope evaporated fast when I recognized footprints in the soft dirt. They were mine, from 2 nights ago. I recognized the pattern of my own boots. I was backtracking in a circle with no memory of turning around. The day lurched on. Exhaustion made my legs feel like lead. Duke was panting heavily, clearly dehydrated. I pressed on for hours, or minutes, or a lifetime. I can't say. Eventually, the trees parted to reveal a steep drop. It was that same gorge again, the one I thought I'd followed downstream. How I'd circled back, I had no idea, but at least there was a vantage point. I peered down. That's when I saw Duke at the bottom of the gorge, but he was right beside me on the ledge. I froze, goose flesh ripping up my arms. The Duke in the gorge was limping, fur ragged, whining. Then he disappeared behind a rocky outcropping. My real Duke, next to me, started barking frantically, pacing along the gorge's edge. I felt nauseated. Was I seeing things? Was time looping in some insane manner, showing me events from the future or the past? I had no rational explanation. All I knew was that fear was strangling every rational thought. I called out, "Hello," because I had no idea what else to do. My voice echoed. Silence followed. We retreated from the gorge, heading west, or at least I think it was west. Clouds still blocked the sun, so my sense of direction was guesswork. Eventually, I stumbled onto what looked like an old path, or maybe a game trail. There were footprints here, older ones, but definitely human. I latched onto that sign of civilization like it was a lifeline. That night, if it was truly night, I made camp on what I assumed was an elevated stretch of ground. I tried to light a fire, but the flames refused to stay bright. The tinder caught, flared orange for a moment, then flickered a sickly blue. It kept going out. In the end, I huddled in my tent with the Duke, hatchet laid across my lap. I must have dozed, because I snapped awake to the sound of footsteps circling my tent. Soft, deliberate steps. Duke snarled, pressed against the nylon wall. "Jack," came the whispered voice from outside. "Let me in." Sarkis. My blood went cold. I fumbled for my flashlight, flicked it on, but it died immediately. Duke barked, a frenzy of rage and fear. The footsteps moved around to the front of the tent. The zipper started to open from the outside, so I yanked it from the inside, jamming it, preventing it from unzipping. My heart hammered. "Go away," I shouted. "I'm armed." The footsteps retreated a few paces. Then a soft chuckle drifted through the night. "Armed with what?" Sarkis asked, his voice almost amused. "You're in my hollow, Jack." I stayed awake, hatchet in a death grip, braced against the tent door. The forest remained quiet except for the pounding of my own heart. If Sarkis had left or vanished, I never heard him do it. Eventually, at some point that might have been dawn, I dared to look outside. I saw no footprints near my tent, even though the ground was soft and muddy. Yet Duke's hackles remained raised, and he refused to wander from my side. I decided that day 6 or perhaps day 7, was the day I'd leave everything behind if needed. Maps, extra gear, whatever slowed me down. I'd keep water, the hatchet, some food. I'd push until I found a logging road or a phone signal. I told Duke, "We're getting out of here, boy." He regarded me with anxious eyes, letting out a faint whine. I slung my pack on, clutched the hatchet in one hand, and marched. After who knows how many hours of forging through overgrown brush, we reached a slope that was suspiciously familiar. We scaled it. At the top, I looked down on a valley. The sight made my stomach drop. The valley was a twisted labyrinth of gnarled trees and jagged rocks that formed a near-perfect circle. At its center, I saw a swirl of mist or smoke. The air was thick with that sulfur stench. Even from atop the ridge, the odor burned my nostrils. I realized with mounting dread that I had no idea where else to go but down. I could backtrack, but that had never worked so far. This valley, this Devil's Hollow, the name came to me unbidden, seemed like the heart of whatever was happening. If I wanted to break free of it, maybe I had to confront it. So I slid and half fell down the slope, guiding Duke behind me. The approach was brutal. Thorns tore at my clothes, and loose rocks spilled underfoot. When we finally reached the bottom, the swirling mist parted, revealing a narrow passage like a dry creek bed leading deeper into the earth. I felt something pulling me there, an almost magnetic urge. It was horrifying, but also had a strange inevitability. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming to run, but at that moment, Duke let out a howl and bolted forward, as if chasing something. I shouted, tried to grab his collar, but he was too quick, bounding into the passage and out of sight. Panic roared through me. I couldn't lose him. He was my last link to sanity, so I chased him, slipping on wet rocks, scraping my hands raw. The passage opened into a wide, smooth-walled chamber of stone. It was like stepping into a hidden canyon. The air was cold and smelled of damp soil and old rot. Bizarrely, a campfire burned in the center, flickering an eerie pale flame. No sign of fuel or tinder, just flame on bare rock. Standing beside that flame was Sarkis. His face wore the same easy smile, but his eyes seemed deeper, blacker, no reflection in them at all. Next to him sat Duke, silent, staring at me with unblinking eyes. My heart seized in my chest. "Duke?" I whispered. No movement. The dog's tail was limp. He didn't bark or wag, he just stared. Sarkis spread his arms in a welcoming gesture. "You made it, Jack. I knew you would." I swallowed hard, hatchet clenched. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing he didn't accept," Sarkis said smoothly. "I fed him. He was so hungry, poor thing." My stomach twisted in horror. "Fed him what?" Sarkis tilted his head, considering me. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of that pale fire. "You felt it, haven't you?" he said softly. "Time splintering. That sense of losing your mind, your sense of direction. The forest rejects you, the sky denies you, your dog sees the truth. There are no rules here, Jack. Not if you're willing to let go." Duke let out a low growl, but it was aimed at me. His gaze pinned me with an alien hostility. My loyal shepherd turned cold. Something snapped in me. I lifted the hatchet, screaming, "Duke, snap out of it!" But Duke lunged, jaws flashing. I stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding his bite, and swung the hatchet in defense. I missed. He came at me again, teeth tearing at my arm, jaws powerful enough that I felt bones strain. I howled in pain, adrenaline surging. "Stop, Duke," I pleaded. But there was no recognition in his eyes, just emptiness. He drove me to the ground. I managed to get a leg under him and kicked hard, sending him sprawling. Then, with tears blurring my vision, I brought the hatchet down. I connected with his ribs. Duke yelped, black ichor gushing from the wound. It wasn't blood, it was thick tar-like sludge. My stomach lurched, and I nearly vomited. He looked at me with a momentary flicker of recognition, as if the real Duke was there in pain. Then that glimmer died. He snapped at me again, though weaker now. Out of instinct, or desperation, or raw horror, I swung the hatchet twice more. The wet thunk was nauseating. The dog collapsed with a final whimper, a growing pool of black seeping out beneath him. I crawled away, sobbing, half mad with anguish. Sarkis watched, expression thoughtful. He didn't seem angry or thrilled, just mildly curious, as if I was an experiment that had played out. I wanted to scream at him, but I had no words. Duke was dead or possessed, or something far worse, and I had done it. Sarkis crouched by Duke's body. He reached out a hand, touched the black fluid, and swirled it between his fingers like a child playing in paint. "Isn't it strange," he murmured, "how easy it is to cast aside loyalty and love when you're terrified?" I staggered to my feet, raising the hatchet. "You bastard!" He stood as well, though I didn't see him move, one moment crouching, the next upright. My world spun and my ears rang as if the air pressure had dropped. "I can show you a path out of here," he said calmly. "This place, it's mine, but it doesn't have to be yours forever. Surrender a piece of yourself, and you can walk away free. I stared, chest heaving. I'd rather die. He sighed. You humans always say that at first. And then he rushed me. Or maybe he didn't move at all, but I felt him slam into me, felt the cold sear of his presence, the impossibility of something not entirely physical. Pain exploded in my head as if all my worst memories played at once. I glimpsed, like a flicker, another me standing behind him, an identical figure with vacant eyes. My own face, twisted in silent agony. I screamed and lashed out, connecting with nothing. I tripped backward, landing near the white flame. It scorched my skin even from a foot away. Sarkis appeared above me, those eyes boring into my soul. Enough, he said, too close to my ear. You fed me fear. Would you feed me more? Desperate, I remembered the flare in my front pouch. I fumbled for it, jammed my thumb against the cap. The bright red flame sizzled to life, a jarring color in the pale gloom. Sarkis recoiled for a split second, expression twisting in distaste. I used that moment to slash the flare across his face. He hissed, black eyes narrowing. I saw real pain then, like he felt the burn. You filth, he spat, voice reverberating in my skull. I pounced on the sudden advantage. Swinging my hatchet wildly, I struck something solid and heard him roar. The demon, or whatever he was, lurched back. Black fluid seeped from a gash across his chest, looking suspiciously like the sludge that bled from Duke. I scrambled away, only to see my doppelganger standing behind him, wearing my same clothes, face contorted in an unnaturally wide smile. The duplicate advanced, arms outstretched. I realized it had the same eyes as Sarkis, bottomless black. "Stop!" I whimpered, half insane with terror. But it lunged. I swung the hatchet. The blade sank into its chest with a thunk. The figure shuddered, mouth open in a soundless scream, then dissolved into a swirl of dark ash. The ash drifted upward and vanished. Sarkis cursed, staggering from the flare burn and hatchet wound, his form flickering around the edges as if losing cohesion. I didn't wait for a second chance. Adrenaline took over. I sprinted to the passage we came in through, ignoring my body's protests. Pain knifed through my bitten arm and battered legs, but I forced myself to keep going. I reached the slope, climbing with frantic strength. Every now and then I heard Sarkis' voice echo behind me, calling my name. Clawing at rocks, scraping my palms raw, I managed to crest the top. Time lost meaning again. I recall stumbling through the forest, half coherent, tears streaming down my face at the memory of Duke's last moments. I was alone, more alone than I'd ever been in my life. My watch read 11:59 p.m. and froze there, never changing. I forced myself onward, not stopping to eat or drink. My body felt like it was shutting down, but I wouldn't let it. Darkness eventually enveloped the forest, or perhaps it was always dark by then. I can't say for sure. I only know that hours later, I emerged onto something that resembled an old, overgrown segment of the Superior hiking trail. I recognized the style of the signage, battered and leaning, half buried in vines. My heart hammered with a flicker of hope. If I could find the main corridor, I might find other hikers, or at least a real path out. I limped along the old trail, not sure if it was day or night, sustained only by desperation. The path twisted through stands of pine and eventually led me to a place that looked partially maintained. The brush was cut back, a faint dirt track evident. After trudging a bit farther, I spotted the shape of a wooden bridge crossing a narrow ravine. My vision blurred. I was so delirious I wasn't sure if it was real, but I crawled onto it, praying it wouldn't collapse. It held. At some point, I collapsed from exhaustion. My next memory is bright sunlight searing my eyes. I heard voices, real human voices, exclaiming in alarm. I squinted to see a small group, a Forest Service trail crew by their uniforms. They were gaping at me like I was a ghost. I tried to speak, but only a ragged whisper came out. They surrounded me, offering water, trying to check my injuries. I heard them say something like, "He's been missing for 30 days. This is that guy from Duluth, the missing hiker." 30 days? I'd barely been gone a week. 10 days max. That's when I blacked out. I woke later in a hospital bed in Two Harbors. My left leg was heavily bandaged and cast. The doctors told me I'd fractured it in multiple places. There was nerve damage, too. They were worried about infection. My arm bore deep canine punctures that they presumed came from a wolf or a bear. I told them it was my dog, but they looked at me strangely. The local authorities had questions. Why I'd vanished for a month. Why my campsite, when discovered, was a wreck of rotted gear. Why my food supply had decayed as if years had passed, not weeks. My explanations made no sense to them. I mentioned the name Sarkis once, but they gave me wary glances and asked if I'd eaten any wild mushrooms or had a history of mental illness. I quickly stopped talking about it. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. Days turned into weeks. My leg got worse. The infection set in deep. Ultimately, they amputated from just below the knee. I still feel phantom pain, a reminder of that final scramble for escape. The nightmares are constant. I relive Duke's eyes, that black sludge, Sarkis's voice in the dark. Sometimes I see my own double, beckoning me from the other side of the hospital room. I jolt awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. No one else ever stepped forward saying they'd seen a man named Sarkis in the Sawtooth Mountains. There were rumors among hikers, sure, stories of odd things happening in that region, of vanishing landmarks, of time that didn't pass normally. But there was no official record of anything. The Forest Service never found any remains of Duke or any sign of foul play. They chalked it up to an animal attack. Everyone who hears my story either pities me or suspects I lost my mind out there. I was discharged from the hospital with a cheap prosthetic. The staff recommended therapy, both mental and physical. My finances are a mess. My life, well, at least I still have a life. I go through the motions of living day to day, still haunted. Some nights, I dream that the forest is calling me back. I see the twisted gorge, the circle of black trees, the swirling mist. And Sarkis is always there, smiling with that too-wide grin, telling me it's time to finish what we started. Sometimes, in broad daylight, I swear I glimpse him on the street corners of Duluth, his face lost in the crowd, or see a flash of those black eyes in a shop window. It's never real, of course, just a hallucination born from trauma. That's what I tell myself. Then, 3 days ago, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in an elegant hand. Inside, on a piece of parchment that smelled faintly of decay, were 6 words. Next time, bring more friends. S. I locked myself in my apartment for the rest of the day, trembling, unable to speak or move, because part of me knows the Sawtooth Mountains still belong to Sarkis. He let me leave, but not without a cost, and I fear he's not done yet. I don't know if this account will convince anybody. Maybe I shouldn't even try. But if you hear the name Sarkis in connection with Minnesota's remote forests, if you smell rot and sulfur, if your maps or compasses stop making sense, turn back. Don't go looking for me. Don't try to see how deep the forest goes. Because if you're anything like me, you'll find it. And when you do, you'll never truly come home again. That's my story, and I wish every word was a lie. My name is Jack Whitmore. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in late October of 2025. I wasn't running away from civilization. Not exactly. I'd simply grown tired of a life that felt like a treadmill under fluorescent lights. My days back in Minneapolis were a loop of stress and stagnation, culminating in a messy breakup and a near-constant ache in my gut that I was squandering my life. After months of saving up, I thought I'd escape to Barehead Lake State Park, where I'd live off-grid long enough to decide whether I was cut out for a quieter, more meaningful way of being. I chose Barehead Lake specifically for its reputation as a serene, wooded retreat in northeastern Minnesota. Locals said the forest offered clear starlit nights and still lake mornings. I arrived on a cold day, the sun already low in the sky, leaves mostly fallen, the ground half frozen. I had driven my pickup as far as a narrow dirt road would allow, then carried my supplies on foot for about a mile to a small clearing near the lake's edge. A place remote enough to feel off-grid, but still close enough to an old, unmaintained park trail that I could hoof it out in a pinch. I'll never forget how excited I was that first evening, setting up my canvas tent, taking inventory of my gear, a solar charger for my phone, a small battery pack, a brand new GPS unit, canned foods, dried goods, and a collapsible water jug. My dog, Ozzy, an energetic golden retriever mix, 4 years old, bounded around in circles, sniffing every stick and rock, probably relieved to be out of the city as much as I was. My phone was at 97% battery. I thought I'd keep it off most of the time and only switch it on to check in once or twice a week. The routine, in my mind, would go like this: wake up, gather water, forage some wild edibles, chop firewood, maybe fish at the lake, and document the day's experiences in a little spiral notebook. The next day, repeat. That first campfire was perfect. Crackling logs, the full moon overhead, Ozzy curled at my feet. I was feeling an unbelievable sense of relief, like I'd finally done something brave. The forest around me was alive with nocturnal sounds. Wind in the branches, an owl hooting, the occasional scurry of small critters in the leaves. I remember sipping hot coffee from my tin cup, glancing up at the infinite stars, thinking, this is it, I made the right call. But something was off. It started so subtly, so innocently, I figured I was just spooked from being alone. The wind changed direction too often that night. In the darkness, I swore I saw movement between the trees, like fleeting silhouettes. Once or twice, Ozzy growled, hackles raised. I calmed him, though my own nerves were pricked. I didn't think it was anything supernatural, bears, maybe, wolves, or just the normal friction of a new environment. I told myself I'd get used to it. By the time I'd been there for nearly a month, I had found a groove, though it was more challenging than I'd expected. The nights were getting colder, and some days the sky looked ready to snow, but I was proud of building a small lean-to and beginning work on a more solid, cabin-like structure. Still, odd things kept happening. My phone died out of nowhere. One morning, after I'd left it off all night at 80% battery, I switched it on and saw the dreaded black screen. I tried the solar charger. Nothing. I tried my backup battery pack, but it was drained too. That made no sense, since I'd tested it just a week earlier when it was full. The GPS unit glitched. Coordinates placed me in the middle of Barehead Lake, though I was clearly on solid ground, nearly half a mile from the lake's shore. I reset it several times. Each time, the device seemed uncertain whether I was in the water or some other location entirely. My paper map no longer matched the terrain I was in. This might have been my imagination, but I'd always been decent at orienteering. Suddenly, trails I'd seen before were nowhere to be found. Existing clearings, once easy to navigate, seemed overgrown or twisted into new shapes. One night, the campfire burned greenish-blue. I'd been using the same logs, same kindling. A slight shift in color can happen from certain chemicals in the wood, of course. but bright teal flames that turned purple at the edges, that was unusual. Supplies rotted or molded, seemingly overnight. My backpack, which I kept under a tarp to protect from dew, somehow grew fuzzy with mold. The bag smelled like something had died in it. My dried goods turned rancid, sticky, and foul. I threw them out, disgusted. I woke one morning to find my sleeping bag unzipped from the inside as though I'd climbed out in the night. But I was outside the tent, curled up on the frozen ground, confused, trembling with the cold. I had no recollection of leaving my bag. Rationally, I tried to explain each incident. Condensation in the gear, a faulty GPS, a trick of the chemicals in the wood or some mineral. Sleepwalking. I told myself it all had a normal explanation, yet I couldn't ignore the creeping sense that something was deeply wrong. Throughout these weeks, Ozzy remained my lifeline. His presence gave me a sense of companionship and sanity, until the morning he vanished. It was a crisp dawn. Patches of frost shimmered in the grass. I had just finished gathering some firewood for the day, and Ozzy was poking around a cluster of birch trees near the camp. Suddenly, he perked up and started barking toward the thicker woods. He took off at a sprint, ignoring my calls. I let out a frustrated groan, dropping my bundle of sticks, and gave chase. Ozzy was fast. He melted into the forest shadows in seconds. I spent the next half hour yelling his name, scanning for footprints, ignoring the cold. Eventually, I realized I'd gone too far into unfamiliar territory. When I tried to retrace my steps, the forest felt labyrinthine. My sense of direction wavered. Even the position of the sun felt off. I found my camp again hours later by pure luck, but there was no sign of Ozzy. As the sun sank, a fierce panic gripped me. A million disastrous scenarios flashed through my mind. Maybe he got stuck, or fell into a crevice, or a wolf pack found him. Then I told myself, he's a strong dog, he'll come back. But he didn't come back. Night arrived. I started another fire that hissed, swirling with an almost purplish flicker at its heart. I kept it blazing bright, hoping Ozzy would spot it. I sat awake for what felt like hours, calling his name, shining my flashlight at every rustling bush. Nothing. By dawn, my fear twisted into heartbreak. For the first time, I admitted to myself that maybe I wasn't just dealing with a dog's misadventure. The forest around me, it felt animate, aware, wrong. It was midday on the second day of Ozzy's absence, and I was delirious from lack of sleep. I'd searched for hours, stumbling in circles. My phone was dead, so calling for help was out. Not that cell reception out here was reliable anyway, but still, it would have been comforting to hold the phone and try. I was making my way back to camp when I saw him. Ozzy stood at the tree line, about 50 yards away, staring at me. My heart soared. I sprinted over, tears already welling in my eyes. I dropped to my knees, arms outstretched. "Ozzy, buddy!" He trotted closer, but something was off. His fur looked cleaner than it had in weeks, like he'd just had a bath. His eyes were glassy. When I reached to pet him, he didn't wag his tail or nuzzle my hand. Instead, he sat perfectly still, ears erect, head slightly tilted, gaze not quite meeting my own. "Ozzy?" I whispered. I tried to coax a reaction, clapped my hands lightly, used all our usual phrases. "Want a treat? Want a ball?" He just stared. We walked back to camp together in tense silence. I was tense anyway. Ozzy, if it was truly him, showed no emotion. I gave him water, tried to feed him. He refused to eat. I assumed he might be in shock or injured. I checked him for wounds, found no cuts or scrapes. At night, he lay near the fire, eyes open, tracking me whenever I moved. By midnight, my exhaustion overwhelmed me, so I crawled into the tent. "Ozzy," I called. "Come on, boy." No response. He just sat there, unmoving. I drifted into a half-sleep, the night's quiet broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind brushing through dying leaves. Then, at some unknown hour, a scream tore through the air. It sounded like a woman shrieking in mortal terror. I flung myself upright. A coyote? A bobcat? My heart pounded. I scrambled out of the tent, searching for Ozzy, but he wasn't by the dying fire. My flashlight beam revealed footprints in the damp earth. Dog prints, definitely his. They led out of the campsite. I followed them for maybe 100 yards, my breath clouding in the chilly air. Suddenly, Ozzy reappeared, trotting back on the same path as if returning from the forest. He paused in my flashlight beam, stared at me, turned around, and padded back to camp. I followed, feeling more uneasy than ever. I wish I could say I wrote the scream off as an animal. But the next morning, I woke to searing pain in my left ankle. 2 deep, semicircular bite marks marred my skin, spaced like human teeth, not canines, and they were already turning an ugly purple. I looked at Ozzy, who lay a few feet away, eyes open as usual. Couldn't have been him. His jaws were definitely bigger than the size of the marks. It looked like a small adult human's bite. That day, I hobbled around, disinfecting the wound with the meager first aid supplies I had. The burning pain in my ankle was joined by a creeping blackness in the veins around it. It felt hot to the touch, and my skin itched like I'd been stung by nettles. Panicked, I forced myself to down more water, hoping to flush any infection. But my mind kept conjuring delirious possibilities. Rabies? Some forest parasite? A venomous insect that mimicked a bite? Worst of all, there was no one to help. I had no phone, no way to radio for assistance. The dog that had come back refused to leave me alone. Always there, always watching. That evening, I tried to gather what little food I had left, since most had rotted, and build a big fire. The temperature dropped quickly at sundown, the wind picking up. The ankle throbbed so badly I could barely walk. As the fire crackled, it again changed color, blue, licking around the logs. In the glow, I studied Ozzy. The reflection in his eyes was nearly white. I crawled into the tent early, but fear kept me awake. Sometime past midnight, I heard rustling at the campsite. Something large. Heart hammering, I crept out. I found Ozzy standing near the fire ring, but the flames had almost died. In the faint glow, I could see him chewing something. He jerked his head like a predator worrying at a kill. "Ozzy?" I whispered. No response. I inched closer, flashlight raised. My stomach dropped. He was gnawing on the remains of a small animal, squirrel, maybe. But the weird part was how meticulously he was peeling it, like removing each piece of fur in neat strips. He looked up at me, blood on his muzzle, but he didn't bark, growl, or wag. Just stared with those lifeless eyes. That's when I noticed the footprints in the dirt around him. My footprints, side by side with his. But they were reversed, like I had walked backward. Fresh, crisp, I stood there trembling. Couldn't even muster the courage to speak. Time began to unravel after that night. It's difficult to articulate. I'd go to sleep after hours of relentless insomnia, only to wake in the morning with the sun already high, or occasionally still hidden. Sometimes I'd glance at my watch, battery analog, not digital, and it would say noon. I'd walk a few yards and the sky would dim as if evening had arrived. My watch would jump forward or backward by hours, unpredictably. I tried to keep track in my journal. I wrote things like, Thursday, 9 a.m. Warm, bright. Found more rotten food. Next entry, the sky is dark again. I had no memory of the hours in between. My own reflection in the lake sometimes startled me because I'd look so gaunt, with hollow cheeks and bloodshot eyes, as if days of stress had happened in the blink of an eye. All the while, Ozzy's presence became increasingly unsettling. He never barked or whined anymore. He'd occasionally move stiffly around the campsite, sometimes circling a tree for an hour, sometimes tilting his head as if listening for something. If I called his name, he'd stare blankly. I eventually decided, I have to get out, infection or not. My ankle was worse, throbbing with every step, black lines creeping up my calf. Even if I was forced to crawl, I'd make my way to the nearest trail or ranger station. But first, I needed to find my paper map to plan a route. I rummaged through my tent and realized everything was soaked in some foul-smelling liquid. My gear was dotted with globs of pale fungus. The map was soggy, corners eaten away. I tried to piece it together, but half the text was unreadable. As I packed my salvageable items into a tattered backpack, Ozzy sat near the tent, head lowered, watching. For a second, I felt a pang of heartbreak, recalling how sweet and playful he once was. But that sadness turned to dread when I noticed that around his muzzle the fur had begun falling out in small clumps, revealing a mottled grayish skin that didn't look canine. I decided to head northward, or what I believed to be north, guided only by the position of the sun, assuming it was even consistent. My leg burned with each step. I used a sturdy branch as a makeshift crutch. Ozzy, or whatever he was, followed me at a distance, occasionally slipping behind tree trunks. I don't know how long I wandered. By the time the sun was lowering again, I was on the brink of collapse. My vision blurred from pain and fever. That's when I spotted something bright through the trees. A small clearing, a tent. I thought I was hallucinating, but as I approached, I heard the crackle of a fire. A man emerged, tall, mid-40s, wearing a heavy flannel jacket. He had a short, salt-and-pepper beard and a cautious look in his eyes. "Whoa, buddy," he said. "You all right?" It was so surreal to see another human after so many weeks alone. I slumped to the ground, almost sobbing. He rushed over, hooking his arm under mine. "Name's David," he said. "You're not looking so good." "Jack," I managed. My dog's not..." I trailed off, not sure how to explain. He helped me over to his small fire, offered me some water. His gear looked battered, like he'd been out here a while. When I looked at him more closely, however, things didn't quite add up. For one, his eyes had a sort of glassy sheen, not unlike what I'd noticed in Ozzy. But David's movements seemed more natural. He was talkative, though his stories felt too generic. He said he was from Ely, had come on a 2-week solo trip, lost track of time. Something in his voice didn't sit right with me, but I was too desperate for human contact to care. David insisted that I should stay at his fire and rest. He even shared some jerky with me, though it tasted faintly metallic. My stomach cramped, but I forced it down. I was beyond starving, my body racked with fever. Ozzy appeared at the edge of the clearing, but David didn't react. He just kept talking, telling me about all the northern lights he'd seen, how quiet the nights had been. Only later, when I asked him if he'd seen a golden dog running around, did David glance over. "Oh, yeah, I might have seen it, hard to say." And then he changed the subject abruptly. Still, he seemed helpful at first. Said he might have antibiotic ointment for my infected ankle. He rummaged in his pack, pulling out a small tin. He gave me an odd grin. "Hold out your foot." I complied. As he applied the ointment, a wave of vertigo hit me. My vision swam with black spots. I regained some clarity an unknown amount of time later. A half moon cast dull light on the clearing, the fire little more than embers. My mouth felt numb. I tried to stand but wobbled. David was nowhere in sight. His pack lay open, revealing an old photo pinned to the inside flap. It looked like a younger man. Same face? Possibly. But the date scrawled on it was from 2 years ago. I squinted closer and saw missing person typed along the top of the photograph. Heart pounding, I glanced around. David's tent was partly unzipped. My curiosity overcame me. I carefully unzipped it the rest of the way, just enough to shine my flashlight inside. I almost screamed. Lying on the ground was a desiccated corpse, face half concealed by a sleeping bag. The hair color matched David's. The dried skin clung tight to the skull. Its eyes were empty sockets. The body wore a tattered vest, a name patch reading, David. I felt bile rise in my throat. My mind spun with horrible conclusions. The man at the fire was not David, but it had David's face, just younger, more vital. It was wearing a flannel jacket that seemed too clean. I backed away, shaking, desperate not to make a sound. Where is he, or where is it? I stumbled toward the dying embers, aware that I needed to get out of there. No matter how sick I was, staying put meant my doom. I reached for my own battered backpack, but found my water canteen missing. In its place sat a rusted tin mug filled with water. I hesitated, a sense of panic flaring. My thirst was severe, though, and my head pounded. Without thinking, I took a small sip. Immediately, my lips tingled, and the world spun. I spat the liquid out, coughing violently, forcing myself to vomit. I recognized the bitterness, a fungal tang, something vile. Then he emerged from the darkness, face blank, eyes glittering. "Jack, buddy," he said, voice calm. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Why are you up?" I tried to speak, but only managed a moan of anger and fear, saliva dribbling down my chin. I pointed at the water. He gave a low sigh, then advanced on me with slow steps as if he knew I couldn't run. My ankle flared with pain, infection throbbing. I did the only thing I could. I groped around for a log near the fire's edge, still hot, and flung it at him. It struck his chest, leaving a black scorch mark on his flannel. He staggered backward but didn't cry out in pain. Instead, he hissed in a voice that sounded wrong, like an echo layered on top of a man's voice. I spun away, hobbling towards the tree line. Ozzy was there. He stared at me, not moving to help or hinder. I gritted my teeth, half expecting an attack, but he simply backed away, giving me space to pass, as if inviting me deeper into the forest. I fought the urge to collapse, every breath sending shooting pains down my infected leg. The forest closed around me in a suffocating hush. No wind, no rustling animals. I had no idea how far or which direction I ran. At some point, I collapsed near a massive pine tree, hacking coughs ripping through my chest. The chills were unbearable. My ankle had swollen to nearly double its size, the lines of black infection creeping mid-calf. I tried to breathe through the terror, rummaging in my backpack for anything. Gauze, matches, I had a partial kit. I realized with a sickening sense of dread that this thing that had taken David's form, might follow me. I needed a weapon, a makeshift one at least. With the small handsaw I carried, I cut away a jagged branch from the pine tree. It ended up about as long as my forearm, sharpened to a gnarly point. Would that be enough against a shape-shifting creature? Probably not, but I had to try. In my delirium, I remembered that David had put ointment on my bite wound. Possibly something toxic or malicious. My own blood felt hot against the bandages. Perhaps, I thought, if my blood is already infected with whatever is happening here, it might hurt it as well. I pulled back the cloth, revealing angry, festering flesh. The black lines were thick. It was the single most disgusting thing I'd ever seen on my own body, like a dead spiderweb inside my skin. I worked up the courage and smeared that infected blood on the tip of the pine stake. The agony of pressing the wound made me almost pass out, but I forced myself to do it. Thunder rumbled overhead. The moon flickered behind clouds. My watch read 9 p.m., but the sky looked like dawn was approaching. The sense of time being unhinged only grew stronger. I tested my leg. Every step was excruciating, but I had to keep moving. Then I heard it, a voice calling from behind the trees, slithering between the trunks. "Jack, Jack, buddy, let me help you." It was David's voice, but also not. A warbling echo overlapped it, making the words stretch. I pressed my back against the pine, stake in hand, refusing to cry out. I saw a figure flicker between the shadows. Then suddenly it was there, stepping into a moonbeam. The shape was David's, yes, but the eyes were darker, too large, the grin unnaturally wide. My heart thundered. I brandished the sharpened branch. "Don't come any closer," I croaked. He cocked his head. "What are you going to do, kill me?" A thin trickle of laughter. "I just want to help, Jack." He took one slow step forward, arms outstretched. Snap! Another step, snap. He was barely 5 feet away now. Desperation fueled me. I lunged awkwardly, driving the pine stake toward his chest. He twisted aside, but not enough. The branch sank into his torso with a wet squelch. My blood-smeared tip pierced clothing and what felt like thick, rubbery flesh. I expected a gush of blood. Instead, a steaming white vapor hissed out, carrying faint screams, as if multiple voices were exhaled at once. David's mouth opened in a silent roar. The edges of his face rippled, as though he was about to peel it off. The flannel jacket melted at the seams, dripping a slimy substance onto the ground. He slashed at me, ripping open my left shoulder. Pain exploded. Hot blood poured, and I fell back, screaming. For a moment, we locked eyes. Behind his swirling black irises, I saw something ancient and hateful. Then, with a trembling hiss, he tore the stake from his chest and staggered backward. The hole in his torso spat more of that steaming vapor. He let out an inhuman shriek, turned, and staggered into the darkness, half limping, half gliding. I was left shaking, shoulder bleeding, half propped against the pine. Ozzy's true form. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. My left shoulder was sticky with blood, the infection in my ankle creeping ever higher. Eventually, I heard soft footfalls. I tried to raise the stake again, but it was gone, wrenched away by the creature. In the dim moonlight, Ozzy appeared, sniffing the air. My heart pounded. I half expected him to attack me next. He approached slowly, muzzle quivering. In a moment of half-awareness, I thought, maybe he's truly back. I tried to stroke him, my trembling hand brushing the top of his head. That's when he lunged, teeth snapping an inch from my face. I screamed, flailing. His jaw clamped on my forearm, ripping a chunk of flesh. The pain was unspeakable. I grappled with him, tears running down my cheeks at the betrayal. But the deeper terror was that this thing was not my dog. Its body felt too light, bones arranged unnaturally. Despite the extreme violence of its attack, it made hardly any sound. No growls, no snarls, just a sickening gnash of teeth. Summoning a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed a fist-sized rock from the forest floor and brought it down hard on Ozzy's skull. He jerked backward, dazed. I struck again and again, until I heard a wet crunch. His body convulsed, then went limp. I scrambled away, panting, tears stinging my eyes. When I shone my flashlight on the body, I saw it wasn't just a dog's remains. The skull shape was wrong. The bone was elongated like a bird's, teeth arranged in a nightmare puzzle. The fur peeled away in places, revealing mottled, scaly patches. I retched, heaving until nothing was left in my stomach. Eventually, I crawled away, sobbing. A thick blanket of clouds rolled across the sky, and it began to drizzle. My world narrowed to the sharp throb of my shoulder and the infected burn of my ankle. I half expected the forest to swallow me at any moment, But then, in a bizarre moment of clarity, I heard helicopter blades in the distance, echoing above the treetops. I looked up and, sure enough, there were lights cutting across the sky. A search party? Maybe a rescue operation? My pulse quickened with cautious hope. Perhaps someone had realized I was missing. Or maybe another camper had reported strange sightings. All I knew was that I had to make myself visible. I pushed myself upright, wincing as the pain threatened to knock me out. Step by agonizing step, I lurched into a clearing, stumbling over roots and fallen branches. I waved my arms feebly, shouting with what remained of my voice. The helicopter hovered, searchlight sweeping across the treetops. It inched closer until the beam illuminated the clearing, bright and blinding. My relief was short-lived. I squinted up, trying to make out the shape of the helicopter or the emblem on its side. In that glaring spotlight, I saw silhouettes leaning out, people in rescue gear, presumably. One of them waved. But something was off. He waved too slowly, as if each motion was a deliberate pantomime. Then I saw the grin. Even from a distance, I could tell it was too wide, too forced. An ice-cold realization rippled through me. They found me. Or maybe it found me. Did that thing replicate more than just a single form? Could it influence them? Was it controlling them from within? As I tried to limp forward, the helicopter's light snapped off. The clearing plunged into darkness. The blades grew fainter, then soared away, leaving me alone, half blind, uncertain if I'd just imagined the wave. I collapsed to my knees, tears of pain and hopelessness carving paths down my filthy cheeks. My shoulder wound had left me weak, and I'd lost the stake. No dog, no backup, no map. A raw wound in my forearm from Ozzy's final attack. I thought of crawling, but my vision tilted dangerously. Warmth seeped through my clothes, likely my own blood. Then, in the blackness between trees, I glimpsed two pale eyes. For a moment they looked like Ozzy's. Or perhaps that was just my battered mind conjuring illusions. The eyes vanished, then reappeared closer, accompanied by a faint shape, a dog's head cocked to one side. Wasn't Ozzy's skull crushed? My mind screamed. But there it was, somehow, the same golden fur, or a perfect imitation. I let out a strangled gasp, trying to scramble backward, but my strength was gone. The dog's face hovered near a tree trunk, lips curled in that silent, too wide grin. The forest around me seemed to breathe with a malevolent hush. I waited for that final lunge, that final snap of jaws. It never came. Instead, the shape just stared, unblinking, as the last of my energy ebbed away. My watch read 2:15 a.m. The sky looked like pre-dawn, but everything felt uncertain. A swirl of clouds parted overhead, revealing a quarter moon. That brief glow illuminated the dog's head again. Indeed, it was Ozzy, or what was left of him. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural reflection. I slumped onto my side, all feeling drifting from my limbs. I was too weak to fight or flee. The only motion was the subtle tilt of that head, and a quiet hiss echoing from deeper in the woods, like something large exhaling. Before I blacked out, I thought I heard footsteps approaching. Maybe rescue workers, maybe something else. My last conscious vision was that dog's broken muzzle, parted in a grin, dripping with fresh blood. And then darkness consumed me. I wish I could say I woke up in a hospital bed, or that the next day a real Ranger helicopter found me. But the truth is, I don't know what happened after I lost consciousness. I only remember a swirl of fear, half-formed images of the forest floor, the stench of rot, and a feeling that something or someone dragged me away. I sometimes dream that I'm still there, limping through the twisted pines, the sun rising and setting in the wrong order. In those nightmares, Ozzy never stopped staring. David's grin lingers in the shadows, always a few steps behind me. If you're reading this, maybe you found my journal, or maybe I somehow survived to tell the tale. But the sense of dread remains, because out there, in Barehead State Park, is something that can wear our faces, our voices, and even the bodies of those we love. And it's waiting. My name is Alyssa Barrett. I'm 38 years old, and this happened in August 2025 on the outskirts of Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota. I wish I could say I'm telling this story for closure, but I don't know if closure is even possible. Maybe this is just an effort to convince myself that I'm still me. I'd been traveling in my self-converted RV for about 5 months at that point, ever since my divorce became official. I walked out of a decade-long marriage with only what I could fit in my retrofitted camper, a 20-foot home on wheels. It felt like a clean break. Most people want a stationary roof and a stable zip code after a life event like that, but I wanted exactly the opposite. I wanted the open road, isolation, new skies over my head each week. So, I packed up my cameras, my laptop, and a handful of personal items, determined to photograph every national park or scenic wilderness that caught my eye. By August, I found myself drawn to Minnesota's North Woods, specifically Voyageurs, a place that many folks had told me was severely underrated. Its labyrinth of lakes, rocky shorelines, and thick boreal forest made it a paradise for nature photography. I also liked the idea that it was a bit off the usual tourist path. Less traffic, more solitude. I'd grown comfortable with being alone, maybe too comfortable. I arrived at the edge of the park in the late afternoon. Tall pines and spruces lined a narrow service road near the Ash River Trail, which took me deeper into the area. I passed a few official campsites, busy with families. That wasn't what I was looking for. I wanted something more remote. Some lonely place down an unpaved spur. The kind of spot I could park my RV, set up my tripod, and capture raw images of the wilderness. My plan was to spend at least a week out there, shooting photos for a magazine feature I'd pitched called Alone with the Wild. The longer I drove, the quieter it got. I kept an eye on my phone's signal indicator as it went from 2 bars to 1 bar to no service. I wasn't worried, though. This was standard for me. I'd done national parks from the deserts of Arizona to the mountains of Montana, living off-grid. My rig carried me everywhere I needed to go. I had a propane stove, solar panels, a small fridge, and enough emergency supplies to last several days if something went wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing. At least, I thought I did. Eventually, I found a rough dirt path branching off. A beat-up sign marked Maintenance Road, Authorized Vehicles Only. That, to me, was a gold mine. Authorized or not, I could get in a short way, check if the path was passable, and see if there was a clearing. So I turned onto it, jolting along potholes that rattled my kitchenware. The forest closed in on both sides, thick with pines and undergrowth. After about 20 minutes of slow bouncing progress, the trees parted slightly. I saw a small loop near the lake, sheltered by a ring of spruces. It looked perfect, flat enough for the RV, no immediate neighbors, and a gentle slope down to the water. Evening sunlight glinted off the lake's surface, turning everything gold. It was breathtaking. I pulled in, powered down, and stepped out into the silence. In the distance, a loon called. A lonely, mournful sound that made the hairs on my arms raise. I'd grown to love those haunting calls. I took a moment just to breathe, to feel the quiet press in, and to confirm that I was truly alone. No other vehicles, no signs of campers or boaters. This was all mine. I set about my usual routine. Pop out the small awning, check my solar batteries, stabilize the RV on the uneven ground, and take stock of my supplies. I had plenty of water in the tanks, plus a water filter if I needed more. My fridge was full enough. The only minor annoyance was that my phone and laptop were out of range. No uploading tonight. But I'd promised my social media followers that I'd post daily videos. I called it Van Ventures with Alyssa. I'd just have to record offline and upload whenever I found a better signal. That had never been a problem before. I made a small dinner on the RV's propane stove, just a can of chili mixed with some fresh onions. While I cooked, I talked into my phone's camera, capturing a short daily log. Hey everyone, it's Alyssa checking in from Voyageurs National Park. Kind of. Actually, I'm off the beaten path near Kabetogama. No signal, but that's not unusual for me. I'm settling in for a peaceful night. Might shoot some pictures of the sunset if these clouds cooperate. Afterwards, I wandered the perimeter of my newfound campsite barefoot, letting the soft pine needles cushion each step. The air smelled crisp, with an undertone of moss. I noticed a faint path leading from the clearing toward the lake. Not a real trail, just a worn line in the undergrowth. Someone must have camped here before, or maybe it was a game trail. I followed it down to the water, found a small rocky shoreline, and noted a spot where I could set up my camera tripod the next morning for sunrise photos. Night came quickly as I lingered, taking in the pink and orange streaks across the sky. The first sign that something was off came around midnight. I had retreated to the RV to edit the day's photos, and at some point I heard 3 soft taps on the side of my camper. It was so faint I almost dismissed it as a branch or a pine cone dropping. But it was distinctly rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I froze in place, listening for more. Nothing came. After a minute of tense silence, I grabbed a flashlight, opened the door, and shone the beam around. Nobody was there. Just the trees rustling in a light breeze. A few insects flitted in my flashlight beam, blinking away into the darkness. I told myself it was a branch or an animal. The tapping could have been a curious raccoon. I'd come across brazen wildlife before, so I didn't dwell on it. I climbed back in bed, locked the door, and eventually drifted to sleep. The next morning, I woke refreshed. No memory of further disturbances. I hopped down from the RV, made some instant coffee, and walked toward the lake with my camera. A faint mist hovered above the water, the sunrise painting it pastel shades of pink. It was perfect. I spent an hour snapping shots as the sun climbed, then returned to the camper with a sense of satisfaction. I decided to watch last night's vlog entry on my phone, just to see how the lighting turned out. I hit play. My own face filled the screen, somewhat grainy in the low interior light. I started talking about the location, my dinner, the usual. Then, about 2 minutes in, I said something that made no sense. So, I've already decided to extend this trip for 2 weeks. I found a second campsite I really like. But I'd never said that. Not that I remembered, I'd only planned a week out here. I rewound, wondering if maybe I was half asleep and just babbling nonsense. But the words were unmistakable, delivered in my exact voice, my face speaking them. Yet I had no memory of it. In fact, I'd clearly told myself the night before that I was only staying 7 or 8 days at most. Slightly unsettled, I chalked it up to exhaustion or some random nighttime whim. Sure, maybe I'd considered the notion off camera, or maybe I'd dreamt about it. I resolved to keep track of my logs more carefully. I told myself it was no big deal. I carried on with my day, hiking around the immediate area. The forest grew dense, but I wanted some environmental shots of old pines, maybe some mushrooms or lichens. That's part of how I made money, selling nature photography to stock sites and magazines. The quiet was absolute. I was used to solitude, but something about this hush felt heavier. Even birdsong was rare. After a few hours, I returned to the RV, sweaty from the humidity, and discovered something else that unnerved me. My personal journal was lying open on the kitchen counter, and I distinctly remembered zipping it inside my travel bag. Not only that, but there were new entries on the last few pages, scrawled in my handwriting. Except the words didn't ring a bell. The lines read, "I'm so glad I found this perfect place. I won't be leaving anytime soon. If you're reading this, you're trespassing." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the letters. Yes, they looked like my handwriting, but I had no recollection of writing them. Each word felt threatening, as if aimed at me rather than intruders. I grabbed my phone to check the time, feeling I might have blacked out or something, but the phone was dead. Odd, I'd charged it that morning. Or had I? I plugged it into the RV's USB port, hoping it was just a glitch. Part of me was spooked. Maybe someone else was sneaking around. That seemed insane. I had locked the door, plus the screen door. Was it possible I'd been half asleep, scribbling while in a fugue state? The rest of the day passed with me triple-checking everything. I locked the door whenever I went outside, took my phone with me, and stuffed my journal under the driver's seat. I was determined to see if these weird occurrences continued. More than once, I found myself scanning the tree line, looking for a sign of a camper or hiker. Nobody appeared. By dusk, I felt exhausted, mentally. I settled in with a simple pasta dinner, trying to calm my nerves. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The RV's windows were open to let in the cool night air, and each small rustle of a branch or distant animal call made me jolt. Eventually, I dozed off. Sometime after midnight, though, a new sound cut through the silence. A knocking at the rear of the camper. 3 taps, perfectly spaced. I bolted upright, heart pounding. I threw on a jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and scrambled outside. Again, no one. Just darkness and the hush of pines. My flashlight beam bobbed on the dirt, picking out only pine needles and my tire tracks. I slowly circled the RV, stepping gingerly. The wind brushed my cheeks, and for a second I was absolutely certain someone else was standing in the dark, watching. A ripple of primal fear made my skin crawl. I whispered, "Who's there?" but got no answer. My pulse thudded in my ears. I retreated inside, locked the door, and turned off every light. I sat on my bed holding the flashlight and a pocket knife, trying to calm my breathing. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe minutes. Time felt slippery. I might have nodded off eventually, but by morning I was sweaty, shaken, and no closer to an explanation. That morning, I discovered my coffee mug, which I distinctly remembered dropping the day before, and cracking against the door frame, sitting intact on the counter. No crack, as though it had never been damaged. I stood there for a solid minute, mug in hand, pulse creeping up my throat. I tried to remember, had I been mistaken, or had I just chipped it a little? That seemed impossible. I recalled the exact moment I dropped it, the handle snapping partially off. Yet, here it was, good as new. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Was I losing my mind? The stress of the divorce, the weeks alone on the road, the intense emotional toll? Maybe I was, but I wasn't prepared to leave, not yet. Something in me, stubbornness or pride, wanted to prove I could handle this, that I wasn't crazy. I tried to use my laptop to write about the strange events, but I found that all the text in my last blog entry had been changed to something else. My typed words replaced with lines reading, "I want to stay. I'm not ready to give up who I am." It repeated over and over, an entire page of that sentence. My heart hammered. This was impossible. I was sure I hadn't typed that. Could it be some bizarre virus? Or had someone physically broken in and tampered with the file? My locks had still been secure. I was alone in the middle of nowhere. Determined to get some distance, I tried to start the RV. The engine turned over easily enough, but the key fob was unresponsive. That wasn't a total showstopper. The mechanical ignition still worked, but the other remote features didn't. My dash readout showed random error messages: door ajar, low fuel, though I was half full, transmission error. The lights on the console flickered. After 10 minutes of fussing, I managed to get the RV to roll forward, but the entire vehicle lurched and died. Trying not to panic, I opened the hood. Nothing looked obviously wrong. I checked the fuses inside, all normal. Maybe I'd flooded the engine. My attempts to get a tow or find help were useless. I had no phone signal. So, plan B was to hike back out to the main road, but that was miles away. I told myself I could do it if I had to, but I'd rather not. I had enough food for a few days, water, and no immediate danger, except for the creeping sense that something or someone was messing with me. If I took a day to calm down, maybe the engine would behave. People always say not to make decisions in a panic, so that's what I told myself. I'd try again tomorrow. I spent that day scanning my surroundings for footprints or signs of trespass, but found nothing. Instead, I encountered a heavier, more pervasive silence. Even the loon that I'd heard the first day had gone silent. A wave of claustrophobia started to press in. I retreated to the RV in the late afternoon, determined to rest. If I woke early enough, maybe I could push the engine to start and get out before things got stranger. That night, what I believe was night 3, I set my phone to record video while I slept. I wanted to see if I was the one doing all these weird things in some fugue state. It seemed like the only logical explanation. Even though I'd never had a history of sleep disorders, I had to consider it. I placed the phone on a cabinet facing my bed, making sure the memory was clear. Then I lay down, heart pounding, telling myself I'd find an explanation in the morning. What I saw on that recording changed everything. I woke around dawn and immediately grabbed my phone to watch. At first, it was just me in bed, occasionally tossing and turning. The night vision from the camera cast everything in a pale green. After about an hour, I saw myself get up, slowly. I wore the same sleep shorts and t-shirt, hair disheveled. In the video, I turned to face the phone. My eyes were open, but I looked vacant. Then, wordlessly, I walked out of frame, presumably heading for the door. I watched, transfixed, as the video clock counted the minutes. In real time, I was gone for about 3 hours. Then I returned, moving the same slow, purposeful way, climbed into bed and lay down. The scariest part was that I did not remember any of it. I had believed I slept the whole night. And yet, there I was, on camera, leaving and coming back. The phone captured no audio beyond the rustle of my footsteps. I fast-forwarded, searching for a clue about what I was doing outside. Then I noticed something horrifying. At around the 2-hour mark, the camera captured me again. But I was facing it from behind the driver's seat, peeking over it as if quietly observing. Except there was already a version of me out in the woods. 2 of me on camera. The figure behind the driver's seat smiled, a chillingly wide grin, and remained there for a full minute before backing away into the darkness. The whole time, I was presumably still wandering outside. My heart hammered, a cold sweat breaking out all over me. My mind reeled, searching for rational explanations. A glitch, digital manipulation, but I had no reason to suspect that was possible. This was raw footage on my phone which had never left my possession. Fear devoured me. I jumped to the window, half expecting to see some shape lurking in the trees. Nothing. Still, the knowledge that I had apparently spent hours wandering in the dark, that something had also lingered inside the RV. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Was the figure in the driver's seat a hallucination? Or was it some entity wearing my face? I rummaged through the RV, checking every cabinet, closet under the bed. empty. I considered packing a small bag and making a run for the main road, but panic alone wasn't enough to get me to flee. My gear, cameras, my entire life was in that vehicle. If I left, I might lose it all. Or maybe that was an irrational thought. Maybe I should have run anyway, but I didn't. That morning, I tried the ignition again. The engine sputtered, but wouldn't fully catch. The battery gauge read full, so it wasn't that. I gave up, cursing under my breath. I decided I'd hike out in the afternoon if nothing changed. I spent the rest of the morning scouring the area around my campsite. A short walk led me to a tangle of brush that seemed impenetrable, yet somehow I found a makeshift path I hadn't noticed before. The undergrowth was trampled, or maybe parted, as if people had passed this way. My first instinct was to avoid it, but curiosity or desperation pushed me forward. It was an odd sight. Tree branches bent at strange angles, almost like an archway. Something about it felt unnatural, as though the forest itself had twisted to create a corridor. I followed it for maybe 20 minutes, the path winding among old cedar and spruce, stepping over mossy logs. The quiet wrapped me like a suffocating blanket. No insects buzzed, no birds sang. Then the path led me to a small clearing. In the middle, there was a battered trail camera strapped to a trunk. I was surprised. Maybe a ranger or a researcher had set it up. I approached it carefully, heart racing, hoping maybe it was still functional and could explain something. The camera's housing was scratched, but the memory card slot was intact. On impulse, I popped the card out, pocketed it, and hurried back to my RV. If I could read the footage or images from that camera on my laptop, maybe I'd find a clue about who was messing with me, or about how I was wandering at night. I jammed the SD card into my laptop's reader and opened the files. Most were nighttime images triggered by motion, or so the timestamp suggested. The first few were of deer crossing, raccoons scuttling. Then, about a week before my arrival, something changed. The pictures showed a figure standing in the clearing, facing the camera. Not a man, not a woman, just a tall, spindly silhouette in the gloom, motionless. My stomach churned. The next few images showed the figure stepping closer, frame by frame, until it was maybe a foot from the lens. The eyes, if they were eyes, reflected no light. The face was too blurry to see, then it vanished. One or two images later, it reappeared, further away, contorted in a stance that seemed unnatural, as if the limbs were reversed. I clicked ahead, scanning quickly. Then I saw a series of images from 2 nights ago, the night I first heard the tapping. The timestamp matched. In these images I saw me, walking through the clearing, eyes wide open, a vacant stare on my face. My hair was messy, my t-shirt and shorts exactly what I'd worn to bed. I was barefoot, stepping over the pine needles as if oblivious to them. In the next image, the camera had captured me standing side by side with another version of me, an exact duplicate. Even in the low-quality night shot, I recognized every detail. Hair length, posture, my shape. The two of us were turned slightly to face each other. In the final picture, I saw only the second me. The original me was gone. The doppelganger stared directly into the lens, mouth parted in a too-wide grin like some twisted reflection. My chest felt tight. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was impossible. And yet there it was, time-stamped proof, stored on a random trail camera. I snapped the laptop shut, trembling. The forest had me in some kind of monstrous embrace, and I had no one to call for help. I tried to remain rational. Could I have some condition where I was disassociating, or one that made me see illusions? That didn't explain the camera footage or the tampered files. There had to be a force at play here, something beyond the normal. Maybe a supernatural entity, some shapeshifter. Or maybe I was in the grip of a psychotic break. Both options felt equally horrifying. My next move was to gather supplies. If I couldn't fix the RV soon, I'd walk out. I filled a day pack with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and my camera for evidence. I'd trek back to the main road. Could be 8 miles or more, but I'd done it before. Yet a growing fear nagged at me. What if that other me was out there waiting? The thought of meeting it made me sick, but I saw no alternative. The day passed in a blur. I tried the ignition again around noon, no luck. By 2, I decided to set off on foot, and that's when I noticed the sky had darkened, even though my watch said it was 2:07 p.m. Clouds rolled in from nowhere, thick and menacing, turning the day to a near dusk. The breeze picked up, whispering through the trees. I zipped on a rain jacket and forced myself to start walking anyway. Barely a quarter mile from the site, the wind surged into a fierce gale. I heard branches cracking overhead. Lightning flickered somewhere beyond the pines, though no thunder followed. It was as if the storm was all around me, yet nowhere at once. The sense of dread escalated so sharply I began to sweat. Then came the rain, torrential, drenching me in seconds and turning the path into mud. My boots slipped dangerously. I muttered curses, but I pressed on, convinced if I could just make it out to the main road, I could hitch a ride or find a ranger station. After roughly 20 minutes, I came upon a fork in the trees I didn't recognize. My sense of direction was usually good, but everything looked unfamiliar. I consulted the compass I carried. The needle spun aimlessly before settling west in direct contradiction to the path I believed was south. I tried not to panic, forging ahead on whichever trail seemed broadest. An hour passed, or so my watch said, though it felt like much longer. The gloom only deepened. I must have gone in circles because I spotted my own RV up ahead through the trees, the exact same spot I'd left. I broke into a run, cursing. How could I have looped back so easily? The footprints in the mud were mine, scattered in different directions, as though I'd paced around the entire campsite a dozen times. My breath came hard, lungs burning. The storm still raged overhead, but not a single droplet fell once I reached the clearing, like there was an invisible barrier over the site. I collapsed under the awning, drenched, borderline hysterical. My rational mind screamed that something was toying with me, or the entire forest was warped. I had no idea how to break free. After a few minutes, I forced myself to focus. If I couldn't walk out, maybe I could fix the engine if I tried every trick I knew. I was no mechanic, but I'd learned enough to keep the RV running. I popped the hood again, messed with the spark plugs, the battery connections, everything I could think of. My hands shook with desperation. Eventually, I realized something. I was missing a fuse, one of the main ones for ignition. It was literally gone. I rummaged in my spare parts kit, found a replacement, slotted it in. My hands were slick with rain. Then I tried the key again. The engine coughed and came to life. Relief soared through me. My entire body sagged with gratitude. I threw it into drive and maneuvered around the clearing, tires spitting mud. The RV groaned but moved. My headlights pierced the wet gloom. I found the same narrow service road and turned onto it, pressing the pedal gently, determined not to lose traction. The road was pocked with potholes, the storm's downpour returning once I left the campsite. Thunder cracked overhead. I was terrified of getting stuck, but inch by inch, the vehicle crept forward. I was maybe a mile along when the engine started sputtering. I slammed the steering wheel in frustration, coaxing it forward. A sign for Ash River Trail appeared, the official route. If I could just get there, maybe I'd find better traction or campsite with other people. The engine coughed harder. The entire RV shuddered. With my heart in my throat, I pressed the pedal. The engine died. In the stillness that followed, I took a shaky breath. Rain hammered the roof. Something about the darkness outside felt alive. Then, to my horror, I saw someone pass through my headlights. It was me. The reflection of me wearing the same jacket, the same jeans, but the face was blank with that too-wide grin. I blinked, and it was gone. I considered jumping out, but fear pinned me. I tried the ignition. No response. The battery gauge was empty, even though it had been fine moments ago. Cursing, I flicked my hazard lights, hoping maybe it would deter any other vehicles from rear-ending me. But there were no other vehicles. There never had been. Minutes crawled. The storm worsened, lightning strobing across the thick pines. Then I heard 3 taps on the driver's side door. Heart roaring in my ears, I turned. The silhouette of a woman, identical to me, stood inches from the window. Rain plastered her hair to her face, but she wore the same expressionless stare. My mind shrieked to run, to do something, but I was paralyzed. She lifted one hand in a slow wave, curling her fingers. I realized her eyes were wrong. They seemed too large, or maybe too dark to reflect the faint glow of my overhead light. Then she spoke, but her mouth didn't move in sync with the sound, as though I was hearing it in my head. "Let me in. I'm cold." I have never been so terrified in my life. I rummaged frantically for a weapon, finding only a multi-tool. Useless. Another tap. "Let me in, Alyssa." The voice was exactly mine. Summoning courage, I shoved open the door. It caught the figure off guard. She stumbled back. In the flash of lightning, I saw her face, skin pale as bone, lips parted in a mocking grin. I lunged with the door, trying to slam her away from me, then leapt outside to face her. Adrenaline surging. My boots splashed in the muddy road. She stood there, blinking at me, head cocked. The wind tore at us both. Rain battered my eyes. I screamed, "Who are you?" She only smiled. I made a wild slash with my multi-tool, but she stepped back, movement eerily smooth. A guttural sound escaped her throat, halfway between a laugh and an animal snarl. Then she lunged at me with shocking speed, knocking me down into the mud. I saw my own face twisted in malevolent glee as we wrestled. Her strength was monstrous, inhuman. I felt my wrist bend painfully as she tried to pry the multi-tool away. Lightning streaked overhead, illuminating the two of us in stark contrast. I had the sense of being outside my own body, watching this horrific doppelganger trying to pin me down. My breath came in ragged gasps. Summoning a final burst of strength, I brought my knee up into her stomach. She grunted, reared back. I scrambled to my feet, twisting free, then sprinted back into the RV, slamming the door behind me and bolting it. She pounded once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. I peered through the window, but she had vanished into the raging storm. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I realized my clothes were soaked, my hair stuck to my face. The interior of the RV was pitch black, aside from the sporadic lightning. My phone was still in the console. I snatched it, turned it on, praying for battery. Mercifully, it had enough juice, but no service, of course. A numbness spread through me. My mind asked, what do I do now? I had an imposter of myself roaming the woods, evidently stronger than me, able to manipulate my electronics, or time, or both. Part of me wanted to run blindly into the forest, but that was suicide. Another part wanted to cower in the RV, also probably suicide. Shuddering, I tried the ignition again. Nothing. I was stuck in that lonely stretch of road in the heart of a storm. I sat behind the wheel, tears rolling down my cheeks, feeling completely defeated. The hours that followed are blurry. I remember the storm quieting, the rain tapering off, and me dozing in and out of some half-sleep. the hair on the back of my neck prickling with every rustle of wind or drip of rain on the roof. At some point, I jerked awake, convinced I heard footsteps on the roof. But the noise ceased. When faint dawn light finally broke through, I stepped outside to find the storm gone. The sky was an eerie shade of purple, but the air was still and quiet. I took a few steps around the RV, scanning for any trace of the double. Muddy footprints ringed the driver's side, a single set that matched my boots. They led away into the underbrush. I took in a shuddering breath, deciding to follow them. The alternative was to sit around waiting to die of thirst or hunger. Maybe my double was gone. Maybe I'd find help. In that moment, anything felt possible. I locked the RV out of habit. Useless, I know, but it gave me a small sense of control. Then I set out on foot again, water bottle at my side. The footprints wove through the wet ferns and soon veered off the main road. I recognized the thick cedar forest that seemed to fold in on itself. The path curved deeper, the canopy overhead blocking most of the early morning sun. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing that had a faint ring of charred stones, an old campsite maybe. At the center of that clearing, wearing clothes identical to mine, sat the doppelganger. Her back was turned to me, posture slumped. A quiet hum emanated from her, a tune I recognized. It was the same lullaby my mother used to sing when I was a child. I had no memory of humming it out loud, but apparently the double had gleaned it from me. My throat went dry. Part of me wanted to run, but I forced myself to approach. She turned slowly, rising in one fluid motion. As she faced me, I saw that her smile was gone, replaced by an expression that was almost human sadness. She reached a hand out, but I flinched away. "What do you want?" I managed to whisper. Her lips parted, forming words in my own voice. "I want to be you. You've made it so easy." Some primal terror lit up my brain. I realized she wasn't just copying my face. She was becoming me, taking my mannerisms, my memories. That explained the changes to my notes, my video diaries. She was eroding my identity piece by piece. If she replaced me completely, would I vanish altogether? She stepped closer. I brandished the multi-tool again, but my hand shook violently. She raised a palm in a gesture of peace, though her eyes never left mine. "We can share. You don't have to fight me." I barked a wild laugh, fear lacing every note. "You can't steal a person's life." Her head tilted, like an animal studying a curious thing. "But I already have. Your friends don't respond to you. Your messages are answered by me. Your blog is updated by me. How long before the world forgets you?" My mind reeled. If she had some link to my devices, maybe she truly was sending messages under my name. I pictured friends and family receiving those updates, never suspecting an imposter. The thought of it broke something in me. Anger flashed. I lunged forward, intending to slash at her. She moved with startling speed, evading the blade. Then she hissed, an inhuman sound, and struck me in the jaw. Pain exploded, and I fell back. We grappled again, rolling across damp earth. She pinned me, knees on my arms. I felt her breath on my face, smelled the earthy rot. Her features shifted momentarily, flickering as if not fully stable. For a heartbeat, I saw my face superimposed with a hollow-eyed creature made of pale skin and shifting shadows. Rage and desperation blazed in me. I jerked my arms free. We crashed sideways, scattering pine needles. I slashed with the multi-tool and carved a shallow cut across her flank. She screamed, blackish fluid seeping from the wound. It smelled like decaying leaves. She staggered, momentarily stunned, giving me the chance to scramble up. Before she could recover, I snatched a hefty rock from the ground and bashed it against the side of her head. A nauseating crunch echoed, making me retch. She collapsed in a heap, that dark fluid pooling beneath her. I stumbled back, breathing in ragged gasps. For a few seconds, she didn't move, face down in the dirt. Then a moan escaped her lips and she twitched. I turned and ran, nearly blind with fear. Branches whipped my face as I fled, the forest blurred. Somehow, I burst onto the service road, adrenaline giving me new speed. My only thought, get the RV working and drive until I find people. I sprinted the final stretch to my vehicle, half expecting the double to appear behind me. When I reached my camper, the engine hood was open. My replacement fuse was gone again. I screamed in frustration. This was no normal fight. It was a war of attrition, and she had the upper hand. But I remembered I still had another fuse in the glove box, a universal spare. I scrambled inside, rummaged violently through the box until my fingers closed around the small plastic piece. With shaky hands, I reattached it under the hood. I hopped into the driver's seat, jamming the key. The engine coughed. Lightning flickered overhead again, though no storm had preceded it. Finally, the motor caught. I slammed the door shut, buckled, and gunned it, ignoring the fact that I was chewing up the muddy shoulder. The RV lurched onto the main dirt road. I drove like a maniac, nearly hitting branches and stumps. All the while, fear coiled in my gut that I'd see her reflection in my rearview mirror, grinning. But the road remained empty. I reached the paved section of Ash River Trail in minutes. Relief so profound I almost cried. Within a mile or two, I saw a sign for a boat launch and a small cluster of cabins. Civilization. My eyes welled with tears. I pulled into the first open area I saw, a deserted parking lot near a closed visitor center. I turned off the engine, sat there panting. My phone beeped with a new message. Welcome to LTE. Signal had returned. I opened the phone's contact list. To my horror, I saw multiple outgoing texts from me to various people, dated the last few days. One read, "Everything's great, just extending the trip." Another said, "I'm so happy here I might never leave." Shaking, I typed a frantic message to my best friend Megan. "Help, something's wrong, call me ASAP." I stared at the screen, waiting. No immediate reply. At least it went through. I tried calling her phone, straight to voicemail. Fear poked me. Maybe the double had gotten to her? That was paranoid, but I was beyond logic. Next, I tried 911. A hollow ring. Then a busy signal. Was the network overloaded, or was I somehow blocked? My reflection in the phone's dark screen made me jump. I realized I was filthy. Mud streaks on my cheeks, hair plastered. My lip was swollen from the scuffle, but it was still me, right? I pressed the phone's camera button, switching to selfie mode. My face stared back, battered, eyes bloodshot, but normal. A wave of relief. At least I'm in control of myself. I hopped out of the RV, deciding to check the visitor center. Maybe there was a landline or a ranger. The building was locked, a sign reading "Closed for renovations." Great. I heard a car approaching. Hope flared. I flagged it down. An older minivan slowed, the driver rolling down the window. He was an older man, face lined by years in the sun, a fishing rod across the passenger seat. "You all right, miss?" he asked, eyeing me. I probably looked insane. "Please, can you—" I started, then realized I couldn't exactly explain my story rationally. My RV's acting up, and I had a really rough night. I just need to call for a tow or get to a ranger station. He hesitated, suspicious. "Sure you're okay? You're bleeding some on your lip." I rubbed it, wincing. "I'll be fine. Do you have a phone that works? Mine keeps losing signal." He handed me his cell, an older model flip phone. It had no signal either. "We're in a bad spot for coverage," he said. "There's a better spot if you drive 5 miles up. The ranger stations may be 6 miles that way." He pointed. I nodded, tears threatening. "Thank you, I'll do that." My voice trembled, and he gave me a once-over, obviously worried I was some kind of escaped mental patient. But he just shrugged, rolled up the window, and left. I couldn't blame him for not wanting to get involved in something that smelled of trouble. The RV coughed as I restarted, but it turned over. I drove carefully, scanning the roadside for a sign or a glimpse of my doppelganger. Nothing. The forest here looked normal. No twisted paths. After a few miles, I spotted the ranger station sign. Relief cascaded over me. I pulled in. The lot was small, overshadowed by tall pines. A single Park Service SUV was parked out front. I practically ran into the building. A bell chimed. Nobody at the front desk. "Hello?" I called. My voice echoed. A minute later, a ranger emerged from a back office. He was maybe in his late 40s, with a mustache and tired eyes. He greeted me with a polite nod, then saw my frantic expression and battered appearance. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" I gushed out a half-sensical explanation. Car trouble, strange occurrences, needing help. He guided me to a seat, asked if I needed an ambulance. I said no, not physically. I just need to get safe. There's someone out there. My throat constricted. I think they attacked me. His demeanor shifted to concern. "Okay, let's take it step by step." He radioed another ranger, told them to be on alert for suspicious activity along the service roads. Then he asked me to fill out an incident report. I tried to describe the attacker. How was I supposed to say she looked exactly like me? In the end, I stuck to describing a tall woman, same build as me, wearing a hooded jacket. "I think she wanted to steal my RV or gear," I lied. He took notes, looking perplexed. The more I withheld the truth, the more it twisted like a knife in my gut. But how else could I convey the reality? The ranger offered to have a local tow company examine my vehicle. He didn't see any immediate damage or fluid leaks. "I'll call them," he said, lifting a phone. "But the lines are spotty, just a second." That's when the lights flickered. The overhead fluorescence buzzed, then dimmed. The ranger frowned, tapped the phone cradle. Static hissed from the line. He jiggled it, no response. "Might be the storm messing with the lines," he muttered. A wave of cold dread washed over me. I pictured my double's influence creeping in. I pressed my lips together, tears threatening again. "Could you just drive me somewhere with better reception?" He eyed me, then nodded. "Sure, let me lock up." He motioned for me to follow him outside. My heart hammered, half convinced my doppelganger would leap from behind a tree, but nothing happened. The sky was still purple-gray, an uncomfortable color for mid-morning. He opened the Ranger SUV. "Hop in," he said. But as I approached, my phone beeped, a new text from Megan. "Got your message. Are you sure you're okay? You said everything was fine earlier." My mouth went dry. The double had texted her from my phone? Or used my social media? My hands shook as I typed. "Ignore any messages that aren't from me. Long story, I'm not safe. Please call police." I tried to send it, but an error popped up. Message failed. "Ma'am," the ranger prompted. I slid into the passenger seat. He turned the ignition. The SUV rumbled to life. As he pulled out, I glanced in the side mirror and froze. Standing by the ranger station's door was my double, smiling. Her entire front was stained with that dark fluid from our fight, but she stood upright, unmoving. Our eyes met in the reflection. She lifted one hand in a slow wave. I gasped, swinging around to look out the rear window, but she was gone. "Everything all right?" the ranger asked, following my gaze. Nothing there. I mumbled something about needing to leave now. He pressed the gas, and we pulled onto the main road. My pulse pounded in my neck. We drove in tense silence for about 10 minutes. The forest lined both sides, thick and endless. The radio crackled faintly with a dispatch voice. The ranger picked up, responding with typical codes. I tried to calm down, telling myself I'd soon be out of here, safe, and I could piece my life back together. Then, from behind a curve in the road, an RV came into view. My RV, parked diagonally, half blocking the lane. The ranger braked. "That your camper?" he asked, baffled. My eyes bulged. I'd left it at the station. "It can't be," I whispered. But it was undeniably mine. Same color, same license plate. My stomach lurched. The ranger approached cautiously, rolling down his window. No sign of a driver. The vehicle's door stood open. A chill crept over me. This was a trap. "Stay in the car," he said, stepping out. He unlatched his sidearm, an official-issue pistol. I bit my lip, fighting panic. If my double was behind this, she'd try to assimilate him, or kill him, or worse. I wanted to scream for him to stop, but what could I say? He circled around the RV's front. I heard him call out, "Hello? Anyone here?" A moment later, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the trees. My heart jolted. Another shot, then silence. Terrified, I rushed to the ranger's seat. My vantage gave me no view. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped out and crept toward the RV. My ears rang with leftover adrenaline. I rounded the hood to find the ranger lying on the ground, chest soaked in blood. His eyes were wide with shock, unseeing. My doppelganger stood over him, the pistol in her hand. She turned to face me, blood smears on her jacket, that insane grin etched onto my face. "I told you," she said softly. "I want to be you." I backed away, tears flooding. "You killed him. Why?" My voice shook violently. "He interfered." She wiped the pistol on her sleeve, a smear of red and black mixing. "Don't worry, no one will blame you. Or they'll blame me. It's the same thing eventually." I wanted to run, but an equal part of me was furious. She'd stolen so much. My sense of safety, my sanity, and now she'd committed murder in my name. I saw the multi-tool on my belt, but what good was that against a gun? The double, as if reading my thoughts, tossed the pistol aside. "Guns are so direct," she muttered. "I prefer a more intimate approach." With no other option, I tried to sprint back to the ranger's SUV, but she was on me instantly, tackling me onto the wet asphalt. My head smacked the ground, stars exploding in my vision. We wrestled again, her nails raking my arms, my elbow smashing her ribs. She hissed in pain. I managed to flip her over, straddling her. She glared up at me, eyes wide. "You can't escape yourself," she snarled. I hammered at her with my fists, rage and terror fueling every blow. She bucked beneath me, nearly throwing me off. My mind reeled. What if I killed her, but in doing so became her? The logic made no sense, but fear doesn't follow logic. Still, I had no choice. I grabbed a rock from the roadside, lifted it high. Her voice cut through my rage. "If you kill me, you kill your last hope." That voice was mine, trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. "You don't know what you are without me." A flicker of uncertainty froze my arm mid-swing. That split-second hesitation was all she needed. She twisted, knocking the rock from my hand. We rolled again, my back hitting the road with a painful crunch. She sat atop me, slamming my head once, twice. My vision blurred. My limbs felt weak. I heard my own voice panting in grim satisfaction. A single thought flashed. She's going to replace me. This is the end. Summoning every shred of will, I jerked my knee up with all my strength. It connected with her side, where she was already wounded. She howled, doubling over. I shoved her aside, crawled toward the ranger's pistol. My fingers closed around the grip. She lunged, too late. I fired once, a deafening crack. The bullet ripped into her shoulder. She collapsed against the RV's front wheel, black fluid mingling with bright red blood. For a moment, she stared at me with pure hatred. Then a softness crept in, a silent plea. She tried to speak but coughed. Her chest heaved. I stood, gun shaking in my grip, tears streaming down my face. "Stay away," I managed, voice cracking. She slumped, sliding down to the asphalt. Her eyes fluttered. The reflection of my face in hers was horrifying, like a mirror warping. I half expected her to vanish into smoke, but she remained. Flesh real, blood pooling. My breath tore in and out. I realized the ranger lay dead a few feet away. Nothing could be undone. I was in hell. I backed away slowly. My gaze darted around for any sign of help. None. The double tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed again, coughing wetly. A savage part of me whispered, "Finish it," but I couldn't. I turned, stumbled toward the SUV. The keys were in the ignition. My hands shook as I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw her crawling toward me, leaving a smear of blood behind. I floored the gas. She vanished from sight. I didn't stop. I drove for miles until I reached the nearest town, tears blurring my vision, sirens roaring in my mind. I finally found a small police station. When I stumbled inside, clothes soaked in blood and mud, I collapsed in the lobby. By the time I could speak, a half-dozen officers were around me, firing questions I had no coherent answers for. They handcuffed me as a precaution. I was too exhausted to resist. The official account is messy. The local authorities found the dead ranger on the road, and near him they discovered an unidentified woman of similar build to me, with fatal bullet wounds. Her injuries, plus the savage trauma from the fight, meant her face was unrecognizable. They never found her ID. They matched the RV to me. The forensics pointed to me having shot both victims. One officer told me privately they suspected I might be a spree killer. They tested me for drugs. I passed. They grilled me for days. I told them about the doppelganger. They gave me pitying looks. In the end, the story I told was so impossible that they concluded I must have had a psychotic episode. The state eventually recognized some measure of self-defense, but still couldn't piece everything together. I was released on bail pending further investigation, but the region's authorities didn't press immediate murder charges. Lack of evidence, or perhaps they sensed something else at play. My mental health was questioned, evaluations scheduled. If they identified the second woman, maybe the case would have changed. But as far as I know, no one claimed her remains. Some early news reports said the body's DNA matched mine. The coroner's official statement was sealed. I'm not sure what it said. I'm living in a small apartment in Duluth now, paying rent by selling photos and working odd gigs. My RV sits in impound. I'm not sure I'll ever reclaim it. I'm too afraid of what I might find inside. Sometimes I dream of that clearing in the forest. I see my double, or maybe I see me, beckoning from among the pines. More than once, I've glanced at my reflection in a mirror and caught a glimpse of her expression. The same too wide smile. Was it always there? Or did she leave a piece of herself behind in me? In the weeks since, I've tried calling the ranger station or the local law enforcement for updates. They say the case is closed, no further leads, no reason to reopen it. My name remains tarnished, but not legally convicted. I might be free to walk the streets, but in my heart I'm trapped in that swirling terror. Some nights, I scroll through my phone's old text messages and see replies from my friends, referencing conversations I don't recall. It's as if the double is still out there, still sending messages under my name, rewriting my story bit by bit. A part of me wonders if I truly survived, or if I'm the double, the imposter left behind to live this half-life. The details of who I used to be, my favorite songs, the specific lines of poetry I once memorized, sometimes slip my mind. Then I panic, frantically trying to recall them. Each time, the memory arrives slower, like it's fading. But maybe that's just trauma. That's what I tell myself on good days. So that's it. That's my truth for whoever cares to read it. If you go into the remote corners of Voyageurs National Park, if you see footprints matching yours or hear tapping on your camper door, if you catch a glimpse of yourself wandering the trees at night, leave. Don't wait for an explanation. Don't try to fight. Because if it latches onto you, if it decides you're a suitable vessel, you may never be whole again. The price of solitude, of wanting to lose yourself in the wild, might be that the wild finds its way inside you. I don't know if I'll ever be truly certain of who I am now. But I do know one thing. The forest keeps its secrets well, and some secrets are better left undiscovered. If this was a warning, it came too late for me. I only hope it reaches someone else in time.